This week on the Frame Savers, you can't speedrun a randomizer. Wrong song, dude. Wow. I didn't even know this podcast.
Oh, that wasn't the right one?
No. Okay, I'll go. This is episode 75 of the Frame Savers, and if you are new to us, we are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where we try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever tricks, glitches, and stratagems that are available to us. And this week we are actually talking about kind of a not speedrun, maybe a speedrun, a Link to the Past randomizer. We are live here on twitch.tv/theframesavers, and this episode has been a long time coming. It's been on our list for probably a good year and a half, maybe longer.
Yeah.
And I think it would have looked a lot different about 18 months ago, but I was converted over to the rando side. I love rando now, so now we can actually talk about it and not offend everybody. So that's going to be real exciting. But before we dive into that, Chad, what have you been up to, man?
I've been getting stuff ready for the GDQ Express that's coming up soon at TwitchCon. So I've been playing some speed games, trying to get a few more runs under my belt so I could submit at my highest possible potential, and I ended up getting a sub 30 in that PlayStation 4 game I've been playing, Flynn and Freckles, which is kind of a knockoff Ocarina or a knockoff Wind Waker. So that was kind of fun. I had a great time with that game. Other than that, I've been busy working and busy podcasting. You and I have had a pretty crazy schedule coming home from SGDQ.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
How about you?
So when I came back, I kind of have had an obligation in the back of my mind for a long time to play Final Fantasy VI. I did like a bid battle with my chat, and they picked Final Fantasy VI over Chrono Trigger and Earthbound and SMRPG. So I started it like a month and a half ago, and then just kind of focused on rando for a long time. So I went back to it. I played 18 hours one day. I was like, I need to just get this done. And it was a lot of fun. It was a good game. I mean, I'm not huge into the 16-bit RPGs, but that was good. Really enjoyed my experience. I've been derusting James Bond 007 for the Game Boy, so that's been a fun time. And looking to do some FF7 probably.
Hitting those deep tracks with James Bond 007.
Yeah, I'm trying to make it big. So the best way to do that, from what I can tell, is to just pick obscure Game Boy games and speedrun them. So that seems to be the line of success most partners have gotten. And so that's just, I'm trying to follow.
That's the path to success. How about you, Andy? What have you been up to?
Wow, introduce the guest. We don't even know that Andy's here.
No, it says literally on the screen in square brackets, ALG Andy.
Yeah.
But
not on the podcast, not in the listeners' ears. They might have no idea.
Oh, sorry about that. So our guest today is Andy of twitch.tv/AndyFame. That's right. He has Andy on Twitch. So I don't know how he pulled that one off, who he had to talk to, how much money changed hands, but
I won a contest, actually.
Wow.
Back in 2013, Twitch used to do those Twitter contests where it was like, retweet this tweet, and for every 100 people that retweet it, we'll give out a name change. So it was like guaranteed highest percent chance was 1%, and I won the second one they did.
Nice.
It was great.
So what have you been up to, man?
I have been dealing with partially delayed GDQ plague.
Wow.
I sound a little congested still. So
yeah, you had a crazy morning this morning, didn't you?
Yeah, I woke up multiple times in the middle of the night. Couldn't fall back asleep at 7 a.m. Fell asleep 15 minutes before my tournament race today. And then woke up like 4 hours later. It was great.
Yeah. I imagine you woke up to a lot of messages and missed phone calls and things like that.
Yep, it was great.
Have you been getting in on the Ocarina of Time randomizer craze as well?
I've done like 5 of them so far.
Sorry, what is that? I don't.
Zooter. Sorry.
Zooter. Got it.
My apologies. Yeah.
Thanks.
I mean, 5 Ocarina of Time randomizers is like 30 hours of your life, so.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say you've gone pretty deep at this point.
Chunk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not interested in doing that by myself. It's a lot more fun to do with other people.
Sure.
Just because I'd rather it not take like 10 hours.
Yeah, that's definitely the current craze. I mean, this episode comes at an interesting time. We're talking about Link to the Past randomizer because it's definitely the most mainstream of the randomizers, but Ocarina of Time randomizer is taking over the community at this point. So.
Sorry, what was that?
Zooter.
Thank you.
Zooter is taking over the community. So,
So yeah, Andy's an awesome guest to have on here. He was in our Pocket episode where we talked about these esports teams signing speedrunners. So you've heard him before. If you missed that episode, definitely go back and check it. But Andy is signed to Allegiance and definitely well known for a lot of his randomizer play. He just does really well in these tournaments. Recently today had a tie in his tournament, which was pretty interesting, right down to the buzzer. If it's within 3 seconds, they count as ties on the in the tournament. So he's going to be on to a fourth game, I guess, to see who moves on to the round of top 8. So definitely go give him a follow. We do have some community events to plug coming up. We got Australian Speedrun Marathon. That's ASM 2018, and that's July 18th to the 22nd. You can find that at twitch.tv/Aus Speedrun Marathon. And I don't know what that is at all, so I'll let Chad maybe weigh in. Do you know what that is?
I mean, it's a community marathon for the Australian speedrunning community, just like ESA is for Europe and the GDQ service, the greater US. So,
is it mostly like Bayou Billy speedruns? Or?
That's pretty much all it is. It's that and what's the kangaroo that throws boomerangs? The 3D platformer.
I don't know. That sounds amazing. Why don't I
speed that game? There's got to be a Kangaroo Jack video game out there, right? That's probably in there.
Oh, I hope there is. Now that you've said that, I want to play that. So.
That sounds amazing.
Everyone brings their Nest light gun so they can play Bayou Billy. So.
Definitely go check that out. Also, overlapping with that event, we have ESA Summer 2018. That's July 20th to the 29th. You can find that at twitch.tv/ESA Marathon. Always a nice marathon to watch, similar kind of to the GDQ format. I don't know if they're raising money for a specific charity.
The charity's called Save the Children, I think it's called.
Okay.
But
sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, I love children.
I mean, if I have to choose between saving the children and not saving them, I'm going to save them. So definitely go check that out, I would say. So those are coming up if you need your speedrun fix post SGDQ. So the question here is why a Link to the Past randomizer? So do you want to answer this first?
I mean, this question's never been more important for this podcast, considering how often we've talked down randomizers.
Yeah.
I think... I mean, I'll weigh in myself. I've kind of wanted to talk about them for a while because from a technical standpoint, I'm fascinated by randomizers. I've created 2 of them myself, and I just think that the process of creating them is very fascinating. And I think that the reason why they're so popular within the speedrunning community is because you have so many people who are so fluent in the mechanics of their individual games, and you finally get to sort of experience it anew, which adds not just an element of randomness, but sort of that call and response nature of gaming, where you're not just repeating some rote memorized script for the entire game. You actually have to respond to events, and I think that really appeals to a lot of people, getting to not just watch that but play it as well.
Absolutely. I would say Link to the Past randomizer fits a really specific gap, I guess, or a really specific need. I would say it's kind of like the esport of speedrunning, not in terms of, I just want to correct this because I've tweeted about this before, not in terms of like the toxicity that's related to esports or anything like that, but just specifically the competitive nature of being able to match up against somebody and have it be an enjoyable viewing experience. It fits that perfect niche where it's like a good length, like an hour and a half to 2 hours. You've got stuff like Zooter that's going to take you like 4 to 7 hours. That doesn't really tend well to a race format. Some other randomizers maybe just don't have enough unique added content, which we'll get into later on in this podcast, that make the randomizer that much more interesting than a standard race. But it kind of fits this awesome need there, and it makes the races so much more interesting, because when it comes to standard speedrunning races, you generally know who's going to win going into the race. I mean, you're going to see the same patterns, RNGs, and so it's just based more on who's more prepared, who's more talented. Link to the Past randomizer adds this whole random element where it's problem solving, it's puzzle solving, it's learning these different glitches and tricks for certain situations, and it really has tended so well to a viewer experience that it's grown so much. I mean, you watch these speed gaming races, they all have 1,000 to 1,500 people watching them a lot of times. And these are not, big name racers necessarily. It could be a race between 2 people, most people haven't heard of. So it's really grown as a spectator sport, if you will, and just kind of fits that perfect length period, skill period. Most people know the game pretty well. So like viewing it is a lot easier than watching a randomizer for a game that maybe people haven't watched much of the actual normal speedrun of. So it's a really important part of our community, and I think it's been good for us to wait to talk about it, mostly because we didn't want to disrespect the community and do an episode where we just memed on it. And now that I've become somebody who's done a lot of Link to the Past randomizer, I think and I think since AGDQ 2018 when it debuted, I think it's kind of grown on me and Chad both in a pretty decent way. So I'm really excited to talk about it for sure.
For sure. What kind of drew you to it?
2017 also.
Oh, there you go. What initially drew you to Randomizer, Andy? I mean, I know that you've always been in a Link to the Past main for the most part, but like how did you kind of take on this persona of being the randomizer guy? Like,
well, so I guess going back, I started speedrunning this game in April 2012. So it's been a hot minute since since I started speedrunning Link to the Past, and no major glitches. The main speedrun category is fun, but it's very, very brainless, I guess. Like, there's not that many difficult things to it. So, doing that for I can only do that for so long before I get burnt out and don't have fun with it anymore. And that happened in 2015. But I mean, every speedrun, can get tiresome after a while, doing the same stuff over and over again. Turning your brain off and just letting muscle memory take over. And Randomizer comes along, and I can use all the skills that I've acquired from speedrunning various categories in A Link to the Past over the years, but having to make decisions and do things on the fly. And then it also puts you in super interesting situations with item loadouts and super early hard dungeons or whatever. It just added a lot of flavor back to the game that I hadn't felt in a long time.
Absolutely. I would definitely agree, as somebody who didn't run NMG as much as you, but I've definitely run it for 2 years. It was a nice fresh approach to a game that I had really loved, and it honestly made me better at the NMG game as well, I think, because I just got so much better at the actual game itself, and not just, hey, this route of Link to the Past, but actually how to encounter all situations, how movement works, how combat works. I think it really does kind of flesh out a bigger depth to the the game experience than just speedrunning it, for sure.
all right. Well, with that, let's just take a quick break. We'll listen to a little bit of music, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the history of Randomizer. So, A Link to the Past randomizer wasn't really the first randomizer that was out there, but I think that one of the things that a lot of people have made the comparison before about, and one of the things that I've often compared A Link to the Past randomizer to, was the puzzle races that originally were happening on Speedruns Live back in the day. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, there was a time back in early 2012. The very first puzzle race was right at the end of 2011, but the heyday of the puzzle races was in 2012. And there were these races where someone would post some challenge on SRL, usually in the form of an image that explained an outline of rules and a goal. And the object was to sort of, as the race started, you would get the puzzle and you would route it, plan it out, and execute it all at the same time. And this was actually a pretty interesting thing that happened. So the very first puzzle race was on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2011, and it was created by Desirect. And the goal was to beat Cold Stare with Red Mail and the Ice Palace Big Key. And there were restrictions as well included in it. So things like you weren't allowed to have the hook shot, no Cane of Samaria, no Power Glove or Boomerang. And these restrictions were there to try to inform a route that was intended. You weren't expected to just play the game from start to finish, but the idea was that you would sort of create your own route with what glitches were known at the time. And so this very first puzzle race that happened back with Desirect made use of Exploration Glitch and required routing Ice Palace normally to get the big key, which was something that at the time a lot of speedrunners weren't really familiar with. There was a sort of accepted speedrun route for Ice Palace that went nowhere near the big key, so a lot of speedrunners weren't really familiar with how to get it in the first place.
I don't even know if I know how to get it. So.
Exactly. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, we talked a little bit about it in our A Link to the Past episode that we did in the past with Blunt Bunny. But Exploration Glitch is a glitch where you sort of enter a glitch state that allows you to exist on neither really layer 1 or layer 2 and end up walking through walls. Essentially. And that gives you the ability to out of bounds in the game relatively simply. There are a lot of pretty straightforward setups for initiating Exploration Glitch, and it gave you pretty much free reign of the game. And so the expectation was that you were going to use this, and you were going to have to route Ice Palace in the sort of normal way. And so the combination of this made for a puzzle that was pretty challenging. And this one existed on its own. This was, there was like a break in time after this puzzle. No one had really done anything like this previously. And this puzzle just sort of lived on its own.
So did this ROM start out like just at the beginning of the game?
This
or
wasn't a ROM hack. This was playing A Link to the Past, but with just
you just put in your normal
goal.
ROM and you have to start off from the beginning, but okay.
Yeah, so it was just a specific goal in mind. You were just expected to beat Cold Stare with the Red Mail and Ice Palace Big Key. And so that was the challenge there. Now, there was a break in time. The main series, I think what a lot of people would consider the main series of puzzle races were started in April of 2012. And this was with Christos Owen's first puzzle race that he had created. The goal in this one was to beat Aghanim 1 with Gold Sword, Fire Shield, and Blue Mail. It had sort of a list of Dark World bosses that you were expected to have killed by the time that you completed the goal, and it listed a number of different weapons you weren't allowed to use. Things like no Fire Rod, no Hook Shot, no Master Sword, and you weren't allowed to use Exploration Glitch and Fake Flippers. And I think that that was pretty important because it sort of informed the path that the puzzle races were going to take going forward. They were intended to be a much less glitchy experience. There were a lot of tricks that you were expected to know to be able to participate in them, but there wasn't this just walk through dungeon walls to get to wherever you need to go. It was expected that you would use a much smaller series of glitches that we'll talk about. And most of these puzzles involved a number of different things. Things like restrictions on what items could be used or when you're allowed to collect them. Things like you're not allowed to collect this weapon until you've beaten this boss. You're not allowed to collect this weapon until you've gotten at least 14 hearts. Things like that. And so the requirements and the restrictions were pretty detailed. They kind of spelled out in a lot of ways a route that was expected of you. Things like you're not allowed to do this until you've got 14 hearts, but you're not allowed to pick up any heart container or any pieces of heart. So that basically says you need to have beaten a certain number of bosses by that point, things like that. There were restrictions on what glitches could be used. Most of them had shied away from Exploration Glitch at the time. All the glitches were basically broken down into Exploration Glitch and Semi-Exploration Glitch. So there was basically there was what we now know as Exploration Glitch, and then there was a bubble that had everything else.
Yep.
And so you were allowed to do all of these smaller glitches, things like Death Mountain Descent or Fake Flippers. A lot of those may have been allowed in some of them, but with certain limitations here and there. There were also limitations on where you could use certain items. So limitations on you're not allowed to use Fire Rod in Ice Palace, or you're not allowed to use this weapon in this place. Those sorts of restrictions were pretty common, or just preventing you from using a certain weapon on a certain boss, and that was pretty normal. And the goals usually focused on just beating a boss or reaching a location with a specific inventory state, and they varied wildly because they weren't sort of formalized. You could really be as creative as you wanted to with your goals. There were all sorts of ones like, here's a list of 10 mini goals, pick 8 of them and complete them, or here's a picture, recreate this picture exactly as it appears. And so you would have to get Link into just the right spot with just the right inventory with just the right enemies on screen, and working out how you would achieve that was kind of the specifics to the puzzle. That was the puzzle, was figuring out how you might do that. So throughout 2012, there were 22 puzzle races in total, and they were designed by more than a dozen different people, names that you may be familiar with even today, like Tompa, Sean Cass, ACMLM, King Hippo, Barn Owl, Spim, FF Gamer 86, and Christos Owen, all created a variety of them. So this was a whole community effort. And they were primarily designed to be glitchless. Most of them allowed things like Death Mountain Descent or Fluteless Mire, being able to enter Mire without using the flute. And these puzzles existed at a time where not as many glitches were known. So that was kind of the key to this, is that a lot of the glitches that we know about today that are sort of accepted are more recent than you might realize. Things like some of the 1.0 glitches we know today, like spin speed, the basic wall clips that are so common now in some of the glitched categories, those didn't exist at the time. So there was just no way to do that. Typically, something like Death Mountain Descent was sufficient, knowing how to act. So Death Mountain Descent, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a trick that allows you to, from the brief Dark World section that's at the top of Death Mountain, being able to use that to basically escape Death Mountain and traverse the overworld in the Dark World with just the bunny. That was a pretty common trick that you would need to know. And things like knowing how to access the Dark World without having the hammer and having beaten Palace of Darkness, for instance. And that's what kind of separated the 2012 puzzles from Desirect's original puzzle, was that Desirect's puzzle was intended to be really, really glitch heavy, whereas the 2012 puzzles were intended to just be, a basic traversal of the game.
Absolutely.
So Andy,
That's
you
awesome.
said that you've actually done a few of these, right? You did just a few pretty early on. This was early in your speedrunning career, right? So
Yes, very early in my speedrunning career.
So I imagine you probably didn't take part in the later ones that had a lot of really heavy glitches and heavy routing. It was probably some of the earlier ones that weren't quite as glitch heavy. It was just a one-off.
Yes, the only one that I remember even partially is the King Hippo one. And the only thing I really remember about that was we had to go beat Hera at some point, and we had to go up to Hera with 0 rupees. Or we weren't allowed on Death Mountain with more than 0 rupees.
So if you
And
ever had
that
any
was-
rupees, you weren't allowed to be on Death Mountain.
Right.
You had to go
And
spend
that's
them, I guess.
Yeah, if you got rupees, you had to spend. Like King Hippo's puzzle was all about rupee limitations. So if you got rupees, you'd have to spend them to do things or get more rupees to do things.
So what
And
what actually gives you rupees that makes that challenging?
lifting up the rock to get to the cave to get up to Death Mountain, most of the time spawns a little bug underneath that
Yep.
just tosses green rupees all over the place, and it's almost impossible to avoid it. So it was just a really funny take on a puzzle, because it wasn't really glitching, it was just like money management and figuring out how to get around ridiculous things like that.
Sure.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, the puzzles at that time were sort of intended to be accessible in that way. Like you said, that was pretty early on for you. I mean, I don't know sort of when you hit that point where you were really doing, you were playing A Link to the Past at the level that you are now. I don't know sort of what your trajectory was in that way, but I imagine in 2012 you were still pretty new to the game and you felt comfortable getting in on the races, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, times weren't that great in the middle of 2012. Like, I think Christos was probably the best current player and didn't have a sub 130 yet.
Wow.
Aside from Crystal, of course. So there was still a large skill gap between me and people like ACMLM and Christos and stuff like that. But it was It was a ton of fun.
I still don't believe sub 130 is possible. I'm just going to throw that out there. Until I get it, I don't know that it's actually feasible.
Yeah, I've worked pretty hard, and I've never gotten it, so.
I think it's cool because you can see just like the seeds of what makes Randomizer something people are interested in. Is just, Link to the Past is such a deep game. There's so much stuff to it as a casual experience. And a lot of us really enjoyed this game as a kid. And, when you do the NMG route, you really just blow through the game. And obviously you skip lots of areas, lots of knowledge that you could have, you just don't need. So when you have something like, hey, you need to have a certain amount of rupees to do this, then you have to actually know where you can go get rupees and what enemies you can kill and how drop tables work and stuff like that. Whereas, in an NMG run or even any other speed run, you do exactly what you're intended to do. And so it's really cool how this, especially in Link to the Past, the randomizer really requires you to know so much more about the game mechanics than even a standard speed run.
Yeah, the puzzles at the time were pretty accessible. They didn't really use a lot of glitches, and so I think a lot of players felt pretty comfortable with like what route they were going to take, what strategy they were going to take before they even left Escape. A lot of the races at the time were only like 60 to 90 minutes long, which compared to some of the later puzzle races that were created, I mean, there was a pretty huge gap there. It kind of became an arms race at a certain point to try to figure out how to challenge players because people were figuring things out pretty easily. The pool of simple ideas was drying up, I imagine. And so after a while, you start to figure out, what can I do to actually challenge puzzle racers? And I mean, this was a big time of hype. I don't know exactly how most SRL races have gone in terms of viewership and hype surrounding them, but the puzzle races at the time were a big deal. They were happening typically right after the NMG Weekly, so it became this standardized thing that was happening at a set time every single week. There were often more than 20 people participating, a lot of consistent familiar faces that people got used to knowing and watching, so they could trust that at this time every single week there would be puzzle racers playing some brand new puzzle and get to see them pour through the game. And the viewership was really high at the time as well. Christos, who actually provided me pretty much every bit of information I'm telling you right now. Christos and I were talking about how...
In a charming English accent.
Charming English accent. He was telling me that, this was a big point of viewership for a lot of the puzzle racers, which is strange. I think more often than not, most people would say that SRL races are actually less viewership than they're used to when it's just, a typical RTA race. But the puzzle races were a big deal. People were excited about them. And I think some of the things that help with that is that there was basically 25 weeks in a row, something like 25 weeks in a row where it was a consistent puzzle every single week, right after the NMG Weekly. There were a variety of puzzle authors that provided a ton of variance in the puzzles themselves, and it made it easier to sort of keep up with the demand of them. So it wasn't just, Christos was making a new puzzle every single week. It was a brand new person every single time. It got so backed up at one point that I think that there was something like a 2 or 3 week backlog. You had to wait your turn to get your puzzle played.
Wow.
People were excited to create them, and people were excited
almost
to play
like Mario Maker for Zelda.
Yeah.
Link to the Past, right? I mean, you got a queue of levels, a queue of challenges that you've designed around this game's mechanics, and that's pretty cool.
For sure. And just sort of wrapping up the talk about puzzles, 2012 was really the heyday of it, but going forward there were more years of puzzles. 2014 and 2015 had a handful of puzzle races themselves, as well as some mini puzzles that were created after the fact. I'll probably tweet out a link to Christos Owen's sort of history of the puzzle races. He has a list of every single puzzle race that he has documentation for, what date it was played, the image that sort of gave the rules. What a
nerd.
Well, it was very handy for this, I'll say that much at least, but pretty nerdy. But 2014 was where the puzzles became a lot more glitch heavy. This was right after YBA, which is Yuzahara Bottle Adventure, which is a glitch where if you... I believe it's if you use a potion as you hit a screen transition, it activates certain different things. On the overworld, it can allow you access to the flute in Dark World, so sometimes it's referred to as Dark World Flute. It does really strange things when you're inside dungeons, so it lets you transition, I think, between dungeons in really unique ways. I don't exactly know all of the things it can do.
Interestingly enough, we learned a lot about potion glitches and stuff from people that came from the randomizer community that were like super interested in glitch hunting.
That's really cool.
We learned why a lot of things work. Inside dungeon YBAs generally were like partial screen scrolls, generally across 4 full tiles of rooms, but you could manipulate that partially to make it 6.
So that's like transitioning 6 full screens as you walk through a door, so it could take you to any sort of place.
Yeah, we take you to another dungeon, deeper in the dungeon you're currently in to skip various rooms.
Take you to a different Zelda game.
Could get you stuck in a filler room that's just a square with no exits.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar, Link to the Past Underworld is actually a lot like Zelda 1's Underworld, where all the dungeons are actually on the same map. You may not realize it playing the game, but all of the dungeons are on just one big map, all sort of tiled together, and it's only like what dungeon you enter that decides what the color palette is and the sprites and stuff like that, or the graphics are. So if you like transition from a cave into a dungeon, you'll still have the cave graphics, you'll just be in a dungeon that has sort of cave walls on it. It's kind of neat to see that sometimes. But
sounds like cheating.
It is. These glitch-heavy puzzles, I think just because they became so much more challenging, this was when YBA was discovered, this was when the method of wall clipping that involves using boots and sort of just like slowly working your way into the wall, these sorts of wall clips were discovered at the same time, and so these became sort of parts of the solutions, the intended solutions for puzzles, and so the numbers started to drop off in attendance. Now this could have just been a sort of a natural thing. 2013 had a lull in puzzles anyway, so there was a gap. But the challenge of these new puzzles, I think probably had a lot to do with it as well. The attendance went way down. Often there were only about 5, maybe a little more than 5 people participating in each race, and it wasn't uncommon for a race to take more than 4 hours. Having to restart the whole race from scratch, like having to restart your whole run from scratch, wasn't uncommon because you sort of ended up finding yourself in an unwinnable situation. And it wasn't uncommon at the time for the first 15 or 30 minutes of the puzzle to just be sitting there on one screen, just figuring out what you were going to do. Not even like wandering around and playing, just planning the first 15 or 30 minutes. So it was definitely a change.
It's a tough watch.
Yeah, it was definitely a change, and I don't think that that makes those puzzles any less interesting, but it probably hurt viewership in a lot of ways, and that being said, that wasn't really the intent of them in the first place, but for the people who participated in them, I'm sure it was a lot of fun. But it did impact sort of the accessibility of these races for the like greater community.
Yeah. That is a nice part, I will say, about Link to the Past Randomizer, is that there's kind of a standard route you start off with. I mean, and we'll get more into the strategies for that later. But, there's not a lot of times where people just stop and think. It does happen every once in a while, but for the most part, you're able to process the information you're getting as you continue on to another section or do something more. So that does make it a better viewer experience than having to sit there and actually, kind of map things out. And I think that also comes from just the amount of people who have run Randomizer, the amount of information we have, the amount of experience you get. You're able to get to a point where you don't actually have to stop and think. You're able to think while doing something else. So you may be clearing, Eastern Palace out, but you're thinking in your head, where do I want to go next? So you kind of are balancing those two acts for sure.
So
the big thing about those heavy glitch puzzles back in 2014 was that back then very few people had ever even attempted to execute these glitches, let alone executing them in ways that weren't in the one speedrun that used them.
Yeah, like routing them into
so
new
like even me, like I had done the 2 glitch categories that had been done at that point, but I didn't touch those puzzles because I knew absolutely nothing else about what the glitches could do.
Yeah,
so
a lot of those puzzles were basically the puzzle authors discovering a unique way to use a glitch that other people hadn't expected, and then making that a crux of their puzzle race. So things like I don't think at the time it was well known how to use YBA to allow Bunny Link to use his sword on the overworld. But that became a theme in one of the puzzles, was you had to figure out how to have Bunny Link using the sword, which is possible using YBA. But at the time, people may not have known that. So
That's really cool.
Right.
yeah. So just sort of wrapping up our discussion on randomizers in general before we jump into specifically a Link to the Past randomizer. So just here's a quick rundown of the history of randomizers in general. The earliest randomizers were the Super Metroid Item Randomizer, which first started development in November 13th, 2012.
Wow.
That's when it first started development, and the Pokemon Randomizer, the general Pokemon Randomizer, started development December 18th, 2012. So the Super Metroid Item Randomizer is just an item rotation within the game that tries to maintain completability. That's a fairly straightforward one to understand. People who haven't seen the Pokemon Randomizer, that one has existed for quite a long time. It changes what Pokemon are available where, what movesets they have, what their types are, all different things that you can change. I think it initially only released with support for Red and Blue, but at this point now, it supports pretty much every single Pokemon game there is. So you plug
that's
in.
the first randomizer I'd ever heard of. Like
Yeah.
Pokemon Randomizer back when I started on Twitch in 2013 was something that was fairly common.
I thought Pokemon Randomizer came out before or started before
Yeah,
Super Metroid
thought it was
Randomizer
first.
actually, but after doing
Yeah.
some research I realized, at least according to the dates I was able to find, development started before for Super Metroid Randomizer.
Wow.
So
That surprises me for
Um,
sure.
Yeah, Pokemon was the first one that I had found and played for sure.
I'll say, like, definitely when randomizer took off was the Zelda 1 randomizer for sure. Zelda 1 definitely swept kind of the community, and that started development in December 2014 and was released by Fred Conflin in March of 2015. That's kind of the first time where the craze of randomizer felt like it was taking over the community, and kind of when we started memeing on it, because it was hard to watch these world record, speedrunners that we used to watching, someone like K-Mac running Castlevania. Now they're doing just rando seeds all the time. And so that to a lot of people that was frustrating, because you wanted to watch them beat the games that you were following them for, and so many people were just going over to the Zelda 1 rando.
And it's understandable why. I think Zelda 1 introduced a lot of people to the idea of the power that randomizer can have. And I think a lot of credit goes, to Fred Coughlin, a lot of credit that he probably doesn't get for this renaissance of randomizers.
Absolutely.
I think that the Super Metroid Item Randomizer is very clever in what it does. It does change the game considerably to move all the items around, but at the end of the day, it's just the same game with items in different locations. And I don't mean to diminish that, but I mean to suggest that a lot more was done to the game in Zelda 1 Randomizer that really changed the experience wholesale. There's a lot of differences in Zelda 1 Randomizer in such a way that a Zelda 1 player isn't guaranteed to be any good at Zelda 1 Randomizer, and a Zelda 1 Randomizer player isn't guaranteed to be any good at Zelda 1. It's just such
it's
a change.
very random game. I mean, it's the bosses that you're going to encounter. I mean, you encounter different bosses in different dungeons. Dungeon locations are changed. I mean, it's a whole different experience from the actual casual playthrough. And it's, I know, I mean, Skybell's Oth's girlfriend used to run that all the time. She used to do nightly races, and it's a lot of fun to watch. As somebody who grew up playing Zelda 1, and that was, I mean, it's definitely one of my top 3 favorite games of all time. It's a completely different experience wholeheartedly, like, and I can see why at the time people who would love that game, who are just typically speedrunning old NES games, would say, hey, here's this fresh new experience I can have with a game I love. It is completely different. It's not just, hey, this item's here instead of here. It's a whole different experience. I don't know what's going to happen each dungeon I get into. I kind of get to recapture that first playthrough experience that I had as a kid. It completely makes sense why randomizer, kind of swept the community at that time.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a big thing, is that it has been unique in such a way. I think one of the things that made randomizer so powerful is that it's unique because it captures speedrunners for one reason, because it allows you to sort of take all that game knowledge, that innate game knowledge you have at that point, and transfer it to a new experience. And it captured casual players as well, because it was a bunch of people who didn't necessarily want to get into speedrunning because they felt intimidated by how overwhelming it was, but recognized that they could still take part in this community of people playing a game that they actually love with Randomizer. And I think that ability to capture multiple communities' interest made a huge difference. And I think that's one of the reasons why the randomizer craze really just hasn't died down.
Absolutely.
Since Zelda 1 Randomizer, this sort of opened the floodgates for a wave of randomizers. Sort of in the second wave of randomizers, there was Zelda 2 Randomizer that was made by DigShake, which I mention is unique in a way because Zelda 2 Randomizer is the only Zelda randomizer I know that actually creates a brand new overworld. It completely randomizes the overworld as well, which I think is really interesting, a huge technical challenge. So shout outs to DigShake's Zelda 2 Randomizer. There's the A Link to the Past Randomizer, which we'll talk in more detail later, but the earliest version of it by Desirect, which was I think from 2015 or 2016, I don't remember specifically. But the earliest commits on Git as well, as far as his source code, is I think from 2016. So that may be
2016 was when it officially released at some point.
Okay. SMB3, Super Mario Brothers 3, the randomizer, that one was also created by Fred Coughlin. That's a pretty great randomizer, and I think that was one of that one, as well as the combination of that one and the randomizer that I've worked on, which is the Super Mario World randomizer. I think both of those opened the door to kind of seeing the way that just straightforward platformers could be randomized, because a lot more came after the fact. But I think those two, SMB3 and SMW, were some of the earliest ones. And then now there's randomizers for a ton of games. I mean, I'm gonna list off a shotgun blast of a bunch of them right now, just so you know, hey, I heard a game I like and I'm gonna go check out that randomizer. There's a randomizer for Star Fox, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, a number of the Zelda games in the Zelda franchise. So we talked about some of the other ones. There's a LADX randomizer, there's an Ocarina of Time randomizer, Majora's Mask randomizer, a Wind Waker randomizer just came out that's pretty awesome. Yep. Twilight Princess HD has a randomizer. Skyrim has a randomizer. Dark Souls games have a randomizer. A ton of different Mega Man games have randomizers. A ton of Doom games have randomizers. There's a bunch of RPGs, so things like Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy IV, Super Mario RPG, Dragon Warrior, a bunch of other Metroid games, which are natural choices for randomizers. Things like Metroid Prime, Nestroid. I think some of the GBA Metroid games have randomizers as well. And then just a bunch of other games, maybe ones that you weren't even expecting to have randomizers. Things like Legacy of the Wizard, The Guardian Legend, and then even some indie titles have randomizers. Things like Rabby Ribby, Hollow Knight, Ori and the Blind Forest, La Mulana has an item randomizer. Yeah, good.
I'm just so happy to know that we live in a world where Legacy of the Wizard has a randomizer. It's just like, I grew up with that game as a kid. That game is so confusing as it is. It's amazing to me that some human beings out there like Feasel and Darkwing Duck know this game well enough that they can also play it randomized, because holy heck. And I think ultimately, you know, most of the games you're looking for, you can find a randomizer for. A lot of Mario games too, like Super Mario Land 2 has one. They're out there, and obviously coming to various varying levels of success based on, not every game works in this format quite as well as others. And I think that's why Link to the Past and the Zelda games have had so much success on randomizer versus some platformers and stuff. But another reason why this episode was something that came to our mind and is kind of a timely choice is that the Super Metroid and Link to the Past combo randomizer came out recently, and that kind of took everything to the next level. Kind of like, I'm concerned the apocalypse might be coming once I heard that was released. It's like we have now bred like a dog and a pig together. Now I'm like, oh no, where's science taking us? That's how I feel. But if you're not aware of this, that means that there are items in A Link to the Past that are in Super Metroid. There's items from Super Metroid that are in A Link to the Past, and they're all randomized. And the different entrances, I think, that are generally potion shops. Is it the potion shops or?
It's the fortune tellers.
It's just four
fortune
jump
tellers.
Rooms. There's
yeah, so basically
fairy fountains, some fortune teller rooms.
Yeah, and I think on the Super Metroid side, they're map rooms.
Map rooms or refill rooms, yeah.
So, and in those rooms, you switch between the two games. So you're literally switching between Super Metroid and Link to the Past. So you can actually say, oh no, Desert Palace is missiles blocked, or, because the boots are here, or just crazy things. And I think that really just took things to a whole new level of where could this possibly be going? going and made everybody really exciting. It's such a technically impressive. I mean, Oth can obviously speak to that more than I can, but technically impressive thing to have created, and just who knows where this thing's going next? I don't know.
It's pretty crazy, like, even to think about, like, knowing how it works, the fact that two games could be put together in the same ROM and have it, like, even function remotely properly is pretty ridiculous.
So I've heard some theories. I did want to speak a tiny bit to the technical side.
Sure. I know bits and pieces of it.
Yeah, so as it turns out, and I'm not going to get the terminology exactly right, but I do have a basic understanding of it. The A Link to the Past ROM and the Super Metroid ROM actually use completely independent banks. Like, they don't store their data in the same locations on a cartridge.
Nope. There were zero
overlap. Yeah,
overlapping. There was zero overlap between the two games, which is
so ridiculous. For those people who sort of come behind and say, "Wow, this opens the door for every game to be combined," not necessarily, because it just sort of happened to be maybe coincidental, but there are also some theories people have had that maybe at some point during, like, trade shows, for instance, that they were flashing both games to one cartridge in order to take both of them to a trade show, for instance, and that's why the games don't overlap in any way. But it does make it quite convenient, because then all you have to do is make one ROM that has all of that data and then just add the code to transition between the two, not to minimize the technical undertaking that it had to have been to combine the two, because that's still a crazy amount of work left at that point. But that being said, it is kind of interesting. Like, I feel like having
that it actually ends up that way.
Yeah, I feel like once you discover that piece of information, it's like, wow, Super Metroid and A Link to the Past, if you put them on the same ROM, don't overlap anywhere. It's like, well, now we've got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. I'll say I have different theories. Some involve the Illuminati, some involve Hogwarts black magic. But I'm going to go with your technical expertise and just stick with that. But it is really cool. I mean, that is kind of disappointing a little bit to know that, like, maybe there won't be more of this. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's like a border to protect us from ourselves and what we could possibly create.
So to address that point, actually, other people have seemingly been inspired by this, though, because I just recently saw someone playing a Zelda 1 Nestroid crossover randomizer.
Nice.
Unfortunately, it's not just one ROM. You can't play it on hardware. It's a set of Lewis scripts that combine the two games together. Anytime you, like, enter a certain room, it switches over to the other ROM and maintains the state in the right ways and stuff like that. But it's still pretty interesting that other people are kind of getting inspired by this idea of doing multi-game randomizers, even if you have to use a little bit extra tape to combine the two. So
I would like a Barbie Game Girl Plock randomizer combo. So that's what I'm rooting for. If somebody can design that,
that would be nice.
It's interesting. The Super Metroid Link to the Past combo has been something that has been joked about between the two speedrunning communities for God knows how long. Because back in, like, 2012, 2013, those were, like, two of the hot speedrun games. And there was so much those were, like, considered two of the hardest Super Nintendo speedruns, along with, like, Donkey Kong Country 2, like Yoshi's Island maybe. But there was so much overlap between the Link to the Past and Super Metroid community that, like, people joked all the time about, like, you know, like, putting, like, people would do, like, back-to-back races of both games.
There's a lot of that on SRL. I found a lot of those old races.
Yep, I joined a good bunch of those. But there was just, like, joking about combining the two games for God knows how long, and one day Total just looked into it and he was like, hey, I might be able to make this work.
That's nice. That's really awesome.
So who knows where we're going next? That's my conclusion. I don't know, and I'm scared.
Yeah, it seems like it opens the door to people just trying to Frankenstein more and more stuff, but I'm hopeful for the future, if not a little bit terrified.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some fresh music, and then we're going to get some expert education from Andy on how to speedrun a randomizer. So normally we do a section about speedrunning. We talk about kind of speedrunning strats for the games that we're talking about. That's not completely relevant in this situation, but just as relevant, we kind of just want to talk about the strategies that go into running a randomizer, because we joke you can't speedrun a randomizer, but we are speedrunning it in the sense that you try to beat it as quickly as possible, which is the whole goal of speedrunning and the whole reason why these races can exist. And obviously there are strategies and there are different things to help you go faster and figure out your puzzles quicker, do different tricks. And that's why people like Andy and Christos are, late in all of these tournaments, is because there's a huge skill element to this. It's not just luck. So it's kind of similar to poker, I would say, in that way. There's a luck element, but there's also a lot of skill to it. So you see a lot of people at the end of, the final table, if you will, because they have these skills. So just to start off, let's talk about routing a randomizer, because that's really the big thing we're doing, right? You're trying to take this NMG execution and apply it to a route that you're making up on the fly, because you don't know what items are in what locations. And if we didn't make it clear enough, the link to the past randomizer we're talking about is standard randomizer. What standard randomizer does is that it just changes all of the chests to be randomized in terms of what items can be in them. The nice thing about that is how many chests have items in them in each dungeon. That's a static value. So there's 3 items in Eastern Palace. All the other chests will be, compass, map, keys. But actual items. Now that item could be a single arrow, or it could be, the boots or the master sword. It could be something useful. It could be nothing, but that does help you know what to expect coming up. So talking about routing with Andy, who's the expert, I guess, do you want to just give a basic discussion on routing? I mean, the intro route is usually pretty much similar, but what are you looking for as that develops? Is the first thing you're looking for Dark World access?
Honestly, the later the Dark World access, the better. Just because that means more items are in the Light World, and the Light World is a lot more fluid to do than the Dark World. But yeah, the early route, escape is required in standard mode. So you have the Link's House item, you get the Uncle item, which is a weapon.
Uncle item is guaranteed to be a weapon in standard, which is nice. So it requires you to go into escape. You have to complete it. It gives you the lantern just for escape, so then you don't have it afterwards, but you have the ability to see through escape, and you will get 1 attack item. Now that attack item could just be 10 bombs. It could even be the Cane of Berna, which is just more of an invincibility item but can do damage, or it could be the bow or a sword or something more useful. What happens after you leave Eastern?
So escape has 6 items in it, which can also change up the routing a little bit. Absolutely. But generally all runners will go from Sanctuary area straight to Kakariko. Kakariko has 13 or 14, maybe 15 item locations. Yeah. So it's like a huge item location per amount of time it takes to check everything. And that's the big thing. In simplest terms, you want the highest chest density compared to amount of time it takes to clear.
Yeah, about a chest per minute basically is what you're looking for.
Yeah. So at a very basic level, that's the biggest thing to learn off the bat. And then just learning, where all the item locations are, learning what blocks what where, so you can kind of figure out what gets opened as you get more items to figure out how you should route after whatever decision you made.
Absolutely.
Is done.
most of the standard races, you're going to see them go through Escape, probably go to the Lost Woods real quick, and then go to Kakariko. And in that, set of checks, you're going to have gotten 20 items plus. Once you've hit that point, you kind of know that determines kind of how you route your next steps. And then from there on, every single item, every single thing you get is just going to be determining the rest. But generally, you also check the South Shore area, which is like the light world of Swamp Palace. There's a Moldorm Cave that has 5 items. But once you've done like all those checks, you kind of have this amalgamation of items, and you're trying to decide what to do next. Can you clear any of the dungeons that are available? So that's the first big thing to note. Also is what also is randomized is which dungeons are required and which aren't, and that's a huge key. So in NMG, in a standard vanilla playthrough, you get 3 pendants. Then you go get the Master Sword from the pedestal, and then you go clear 7 crystal dungeons, and the 7 crystals are what you need access to Ganon's Tower for. However, in Randomizer, the pedestal is randomized as well, so the odds are very, very high that the pedestal is a worthless item. It's some rupees, it's a piece of a heart, it's something you don't need to beat the game. And so that means that all of these pendant dungeons are not necessarily required to beat the game like they are in a casual playthrough, and that really influences your routing, because you may have to beat them, you may have to dip into them, but you're playing with the assumption that you want to focus on the crystal dungeons, right?
Mm-hmm. So in the early versions of the randomizer, the crystals and pendants actually weren't randomized, so you would know going in what you needed to beat the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in early versions, NPC items were unable, or they were always a guaranteed key item. So like Green Pendant had a huge weight, like Zora had a huge weight, Sick Kid had a huge weight.
Wow.
So very early on, like the route was pretty much do every NPC item you can, and then just blast through all the Dark World dungeons without checking anything.
So did you end up skipping a lot of chests and things like that because they were pretty much guaranteed to be a worthless item by virtue of all the good items being taken?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes things much less interesting for sure. I'm sure that would also make money a lot more important, because you're going to always have to check the Zora, which means you're going to need to make sure you're routing in getting a lot of money. Now with things being weighted pretty much as evenly as possible, you don't have that luxury of knowing there's probably a key item in X spot. You have no idea.
Right.
Like Andy said, you're really going for density. If you have 5 checks one place that takes you 5 minutes, and 3 checks one place that take you 5 minutes, you're going to go do the 5 checks, because there's no way to know. As you develop through the game, the big thing after you're doing this light world checks and all this is to try and get access to the dark world, because obviously you're going to have, even if you have 3 crystals in the light world, you're still going to have 4 crystals in the dark world. And you may not be aware, because in a vanilla playthrough, the way you get access to the dark world is you end up with the moon crystal in Hera, and then you go kill Aghanim, and after you kill Aghanim, you can go up north through the the gateway to Hyrule Castle or whatever, and it'll transport you over to Dark World. And that's how you initially get your Dark World access in an NMG playthrough or in a casual playthrough. But it is possible to access Dark World with some of the items you would normally get in the Dark World from Light World without killing Aghanim. So you can either you need 3 items. You need the Moon Pearl, and you either need the hammer and the gloves, or you need the Titan's Mitts, which is the gloves and then the upgrade for the gloves. And that'll allow you to access some Dark World locations that you otherwise couldn't access. And so a big question is, do you need to do Aghanim or not? Or when can you get Dark World access? Because if you, if you go through all your checks in Light World and you don't have Dark World access, that means you have to kill Aghanim. Also, there's one check, just one specific check, the hobo, or not the hobo, I put hobo, but the lumberjacks, where you go up into the lumberjack cave, and there's an item there that is not possible to get to until you defeat Aghanim, because in the game, once you defeat Aghanim, these 2 lumberjacks leave this tree alone, you can bonk it and go in. So if there is a key item is required for the game, say the bow is in there, or the mitts or something like that, then right off the bat, and that's why a lot of people check it early, I have to go kill Aghanim. It doesn't matter if I get Dark World access early, doesn't matter what I do. And so that does really inform, at least at my level of play, when I'm getting Dark World access is kind of one of the earliest things I'm looking for specifically. beyond that, then there's just like kind of a big discussion we can have about what items you need, because every single rando seed requires a different set of items to beat it, and that's what makes it interesting. Depending on what pendant crystal dungeons you have, you may not, need certain key items you would normally need. Say, like the only place you actually need the mirror for example, is, I believe, is Swamp Palace. The only place you need the flute for is Mire. So like these items that you're used to being very key items to your game, suddenly if you see that Swamp is a pendant dungeon, then you might say, I may not need Mirror to complete this game. This is not a go mode item, a required item.
Even more, you might not want to see it because that means Swamp can have things.
Exactly. So as soon as you're able to get into, so once you get that mirror and you're able to access Swamp, now you say, well, now within the logic, we know that it's possible that a key item could be in there because, we have access. And, that really is what pulls out the bread and butter of what is randomizer, is making these decisions for key items and routing. Like once you have access to things that you aren't sure are necessary, it's making the choice of what do you do. Like what informs those decisions for you?
So I mean, there's the items that are always required. You always need the Moon Pearl. You always need Titan's Mitts. You always need the hammer. You always need the bow and a Master Sword.
And technically hook shot if you don't know how to hover like Andy.
Yes, and technically the hook shot. Other than that, it's whatever the randomizer throws at you. Don't necessarily need Canis Maria, don't necessarily need flippers, don't need the mirror, don't need the flute, don't need fire rod or ice rod. You always need a fire source also. Whether there's the lamp or the fire rod. But it's I don't know, it's really, there's so much thought process that goes into like making decisions at a high level, I guess. Like having all of the items to completely clear a crystal dungeon. Like usually you'll do that because you have to do the crystal dungeon anyways. But if that crystal's like Ice Palace, which is super slow, or Swamp Palace, which is super slow, you might put it off for other things, hoping you don't have to full clear it.
Yeah, that's a big part of randomizer, and it's kind of hard to ask this question. It's hard to say how do you route randomizer, because it's kind of like how do you play a poker hand. It's a similar analogy because I used to play a lot of poker, and it's like you can't really speak of like how do you play pocket jacks. Well, it depends on my how many chips I have. It depends on my opponents. It depends on all kinds of different things, and it's the same with randomizer. Like you may have access to full clear Ice Palace, but if you're early on, full clearing Ice Palace takes several minutes longer than just quick clearing it. Like if you had all your required items, you don't need anything else, there's no reason to do additional checks, it's going to take you several minutes less time to clear Swamp Palace and Ice Palace than other dungeons. So you may put those off even though you can go get them and they're crystals. And so that kind of informs a lot of decisions. And when you're in a race, especially if you're in a high level race versus maybe somebody you think is better than you at execution. For example, if I were racing you or Christos Owen, I would know I need to take some crazy risks in order to beat you. This person's NMG time is 5 minutes faster than mine. They're better at the game. I mean, they have more experience. So I'm going to need to, possibly skip things that, could end up biting me later on. Like if you skip the left side of Swamp, that takes several minutes, but there's usually items over there. If that item ends up being a key item and you skip it, you're basically losing the game. So like there's so much gambling and strategizing that kind of, there's no right answer to any specific situation other than, the real right answer is do whatever gives you the most checks in the least amount of time, obviously.
It's kind of interesting how much it sounds like the routing process for randomizer has been informed by the development of randomizer as well. Because, I mean, for those of you who have never really considered how the item randomizer actually works, you sort of have a pool of chests that are accessible at the very beginning of the game, and the randomizer picks one of those chests and puts an item in it, and now it reevaluates what chests are available and repeat that process. I mean, obviously there's more nuance to it. There's some weighting that goes into figuring out how likely it is that you put a certain item in a certain chest. But at the core of it, it's just, pick a chest that's accessible, put an item in it, what new chests are accessible. And you repeat that, over and over and over. And it's kind of interesting because that the reverse of that is exactly how you sort of logic your way through figuring out how to route the randomizer. As soon as you see a mirror, for instance, you say, oh crap, that means that the logic now means that I could possibly have items in Swamp Palace. That's just the reverse thinking of the way the randomizer placed items in the first place. So it's kind of just interesting that those sort of are the back and forth of those two ideas.
Absolutely. And the items that you get definitely inform how quickly you can beat a seed. I mean, there's definitely ones that will make seeds a lot more smooth for checks. Like getting the mirror, for example, allows you to do a lot of checks back and forth between light world and dark world much more efficiently than if you end up in a situation where, oh, I don't have the boots, the flute, or the mirror. And so every check I'm doing is taking much more time. I have to walk all the way to these different places. And that may inform situations. You know, there's a lot of one-off checks kind of out somewhere that are tougher to check, that aren't on the way to any dungeons, that aren't natural in your movement. And so obviously that's why there's such a variety of time in the seeds. Some seeds require you to do the pedestal and Aghanim, so you have to clear all the pendant dungeons, you have to kill Aghanim, you have to do everything. And so that's what's interesting. I mean, you can have seeds be under an hour and 10 minutes, which is really rare. You can have seeds that probably would even take Andy over 2 hours, I think. So that's like a pretty big range of difficulty, you know. The other thing I like about Randomizer, outside of what we've talked about, kind of just how I have to route on the fly and figure things out, which I think after you've done a good like 50 seeds becomes pretty natural. Like I think it's generally you know, there's only so many certain situations you can get put in, but there's also a lot of new tricks that you might see that you might not see in any other speedruns, or definitely not see in NMG, that I think that'd be fun to talk about. And I think this is one of the most fun things about Randomizer to me, is I got to learn all these new tricks. You know, I got to learn all these fun, interesting tricks for NMG, but I had been doing those for so long. Now I got to learn a whole new set of tricks, and I think that's really cool. So the first one is just, there's a couple of additional bomb jumps, right? I mean, that just kind of help you with your movement back and forth, in Death Mountain, in Ice Palace. Are there any others that I'm...
No, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Death Mountain, there's 2 bomb jumps on Death Mountain you can do. There's like 3 extra Ice Palace bomb jumps that are good to know.
Yep. Yeah, and those can save, I mean, all these tricks can save a lot of time or be completely pointless, like depending on your seed. For example, Andy just said you can do a bomb jump in Ice Palace. It's specifically in a room that requires the hook shot. It's a hook shot required room in terms of the logic. So when we say logic, that means kind of like what Chad was saying. The game puts items in chests and then says, what do you have access to? And it's using the idea that you can only you know, you're not using any glitches whatsoever, whereas the NMG glitches, you know, can actually, you know, it's not going to ever assume you can do fake flippers. It's never going to assume you can do a bomb jump. It's never going to assume you can do a bottle glitch or hover or anything. So when you're able to do those, you know, for example, if you're able to get that hook shot trick, you know, instead of using the hook shot room, you can go ahead and full clear Ice Palace and use that bomb jump and not have to wait until you get the hook shot to full clear it. That makes a huge difference.
Specifically, what glitches are banned in randomizer races in general? I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions where someone says, let's do glitches for fun, but...
anything that falls under the quote-unquote major glitch category is banned. So like out of bounds glitches are banned, exploration glitches banned, YBA, most potion glitches are banned. Potion glitches are really interesting in that like some of them have very minor effects and some of them have very major effects.
Yeah.
Like the potion glitch that's used in Pod is only used to skip the bow requirement for the right side chests. You end up unlocking the screen and you can scroll all the mimics off the screen to get the door to open instead of needing the bow to kill them.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. And I literally learned that. Like I'd been wanting to learn it forever. And the next seed I did, it literally probably saved me 10, 15 minutes because again, the right side of, so to clear Pod, you need the bow because the right side has the red mimics. The red mimics can only be killed with the bow. But if you use this bottle glitch, you can scroll the screen in such a way that it kills the mimic that you need, or scrolls him off the screen, and so it opens the door in a way that you don't have to have the bow. And again, in a normal situation, that might not save very much time, but if you cannot figure out where the bow is, you know, that can save you a whole ton of time if there's a key item on the right side. And so like
So that bottle glitch
that's a
is
really cool
allowed?
one. Yeah.
Yes, that bottle glitch is allowed because it's a very, very minor
Sure.
situation that ends up happening.
Okay.
But it's not allowed in Ganon's Tower because the same situation ends up like completely loading the Ganon's Tower rooms improperly visually. As you
Oh, yeah.
advance them, you end up being like a room ahead of where the screen thinks you are, and you can still open all the chests and stuff like that. And it ends up
So
like
you can't-
despawning Armos and stuff like that.
You can't load
So-
Aghanim.
Yeah, and if that were allowed, then bow would not necessarily be required in all seeds, because if Eastern were a pendant, you could possibly do bottle glitch,
Bottle glitches are the big like question mark.
That's the hot new question on the table.
Well, I mean, I guess it was just like the pod, like whether we should allow it or not, and we ended up ruling that it was minor enough that it'd be fine. But like, you could also use potion glitches to like YBA into a glitched library screen where you fall in a hole into Argus's room and get the turtle rock crystal. Like, bottle glitches are off the handle.
Yeah, so
Stupid.
it's like where do you draw the line?
It's just kind of
It's a
interesting
tough
because it feels
question.
like Ocarina of Time Randomizer is kind of going through this early decision process of figuring out, for Ocarina of Time Randomizer specifically, what glitches are allowed.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's going in the way of accepting all of the glitches that are legal in the glitchless category, which sounds like the way that you would set up for a really funny joke. But
But it actually is true, yeah.
Yeah. That's the Link to the Past has like a very definite like glitchless rule set where OOT doesn't. So that's been an interesting thing to watch.
And
Like,
A Link to the Past is funny
community
because
figured out.
A Link to the Past is funny because it's like someone looked at a menu and just purchased specific things that would be allowed in what we now refer to as glitchless, despite the fact that the game is still,
It
glitched.
more has to do with what visually looks glitched than what is
Sure.
actually a glitch versus not a glitch. And I mean, we could probably do a 2-hour episode just on like what does glitchless mean and never get to the bottom of it. My first speedrun ever was Mega Man 1 glitchless, and that was a terrible experience to be your first speedrun because I had to ask that question a whole bunch, and I was just new to the community, and it's very confusing, and that's why it's funny to make no major glitches jokes. But these additional tricks, I guess we could call them minor glitches or whatever. The bottle glitch is a big one. We talked about doing some just additional bomb jumps, which really are more intended, if anything. But there's a couple others. There's some fake flipper, like the fake flippers are much more useful than in NMG. NMG, it saves you 6 seconds just trying to travel to Death Mountain. But in Rando, it can give you access to Ice Palace because you do not need it to access Ice Palace. It can get you to, like the waterfall in the Zora area earlier than, get you a couple of those checks earlier than intended, the hobo. But also you can use some water walking to like skip some crazy stuff, right? And I don't know how to do that, so I'm gonna let you speak to that because you just did that today in a big race.
So fake flippers, the biggest thing in Link to the Past Randomizer, besides like just getting item locations without having the flippers, is information. So like when you're going in knowing that you're going to be sequence breaking, you have to know that everything that you're getting is logically locked behind whatever item you're sequence breaking.
Yep.
Like if I fake flippers and get Titan's mitts at the hobo, then I'm like, okay, so
The game's
I needed
intending you
flippers
to
for
have
these.
gotten flippers before getting that.
So I know that flippers can't be in ice, or well, they couldn't be in Ice Palace. They can't be in like the Mire area. They can't be on Dark Death Mountain. They can't be in Turtle Rock. There's a ton of things that you can learn by sequence breaking to kind of narrow down where key items can be.
Water walking.
Stuff, water walking.
Yeah.
So you need the Moon Pearl for it. For whatever reason, if you have the Moon Pearl and you don't have flippers and you go into the Waterfall Fairy Cave, which has 2 chests in it in Randomizer, because you can get 2 items from there in the vanilla game, the red shield and the red boomerang. When you leave that cave, the game does like a state check, and for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure on the exact specifics of why it happens, but if you have the Moon Pearl, the game will allow you to walk in that state if you don't have the flippers, which will allow you to go back in and get those items without the flippers. You can also walk to Zora, which is a lot faster if you don't have to walk in the shallow water. And then a little deeper, if you have the boots, you can dashing next to pits puts Link in a weird state that that can allow you to walk on water as well, even if you jump down a ledge. So you could use boots, water walk storage to actually get the Zora's ledge item without flippers, and you can also do the same thing in the Dark World to get the Lake Hylia item without flippers.
Wow.
So it
You can
opens
also
the
do
door
a
for a lot of
pyramid
stuff.
check, right? Can't you do pyramid with this same?
Yes.
So another thing I didn't point out, there are very rare situations where Aghanim may be required in a situation where you have Dark World access and there's nothing in Lumberjack Cave, and that's if there's some sort of key item on like the pyramid, for example. I think only the pyramid specifically, or is it pyramid and
Well, it would be if there's an item in Pyramid or Catfish or Palace of Darkness that leads to both the hammer and the flippers.
Yeah, you're supposed to have hammer to get basically to that east side of Dark World, and or flippers or hook. There's a bunch of combinations of items you can have, but you need the hammer eventually to get access to a lot of things. And so it's possible for weird situations to happen where there's an item that like you're supposed to logically do Aghanim even if you have Dark World access already and such.
Mm-hmm.
But you were able to water walk your way to check the pyramid, like in your race specifically today, to get what, the hammer, or
we got the hook shot, which got the hammer.
Okay.
And then the Bombos was in Palace of Darkness, which led to the bow, which led to flippers.
Okay. And so how do you do that? Like, how do you just walk on the water over to kind of where the potion shop is, but on the Dark World side?
Yes. So the water walk version with the boots is you dash next to one of the pits in Skull Woods. And then you go over to where the staircase is on the screen to the left of the Dark World potion shop, and going down and up the staircase puts Link in a glitch state where if you jump off, you'll be walking on the water. The way that Zero Rush and I both did it today was a fairy revival fake flipper method, where if you die as you enter the water without flippers and get revived by a fairy, it puts you back where you died, which is swimming according to the game. Similar to like normal fake flippers where you screen transition in the water and the game's just like, well, you're swimming, have fun.
Yeah, the game doesn't know what to do with you, so it assumes, hey, he died here in the water, he must be able to swim, right? Or he wouldn't have died here. So there's a lot of uses of that. That's pretty cool. And I don't think you're gonna see some of those in many races, probably only very top level races like you would have seen today.
Specific situation stuff
you have to both be in a specific situation and have players that are good enough to know all these things, which is not a common combo. But if the video post for Andy versus Zero Rush today later on, it was quite the race, so check that out. There's also some other glitches we can go through real quick. Opening chests is the bunny in Dark World. There are certain situations, one on Death Mountain, where if you can go in and just fall in the pit, and for some reason you're able to open two chests in the what are called the Super Bunny Cave. You're not normally able to open chests in the Dark World as the bunny. The bunny is the state that you're in when you don't have the Moon Pearl in Dark World, and so you can open those two chests without it. Also in Mire, if you use the mirror, is it the mirror? Yeah, yes. The mirror on the same frame as you're entering into the Mire shed, you're able to open the two chests in there as a bunny. So those are two like small glitches that can sometimes pay off as well. Pretty cool stuff. Fake powder is another one. Some people you will see use fake powder in NMG. If you get your Cane of Samaria all the way down to no magic, and then you use it,
still have the mushroom,
and still have the mushroom. You use it. You hear that noise that says, "Hey, you're out of magic." And on the same frame, pause, switch over to the mushroom. It'll actually use powder, and so you can actually use that to do the magic bat check. That's normally in vanilla where the half magic is. That does have an item on it, so you can use it there. And so that can be fairly useful in that specific situation. If you learn it in Rando like I did, and you go over to NMG, realize a text box is going to come up because I lost the PB run. because I was like, oh, I can just do fake powder, and I was like, no, I don't know the timing because all the text boxes have been removed in Rando. So, also, I assume the Houlihan room obviously is not in any speed runs, but can be useful for getting money to pay Zora, right? Or I mean, that's really the main situation you'd use it. But
I actually think Houlihan is in the low percent run.
oh, is it? Oh, cool.
It used to be used in some other runs, but was deemed once YBA got found. There was a YBA that we coined Hyrule Magic because it involved using a green potion in Hyrule Castle to bring up the flute menu to go to Death Mountain, and then fluting out of a underworld area the game does not like very much, and ends up spawning like a railing of perpetually spawning blue rupees that you could just farm money off of.
Oh, that's awesome.
So Houlihan got killed in a bunch of glitch categories because of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a room, if you don't know, that's just full of blue rupees. It was actually a Nintendo Power promotion. This guy Chris Houlihan won. They named a room after him. I don't think he found out that it was like ever got put in the game, since most nobody found it until like I think
Years
we
later.
read so we talked about it on like didn't he find out like 20 years later or something?
I don't know if anything says that he specifically found it, but no one had found it for almost
no
a
one
decade.
had found it. That's what it was. Which
it
is
was,
like what the heck kind of promotion and
well, the Houlihan room was basically a crash prevention thing.
Sure.
They anytime that the screen was sort of in a glitch state and you try to enter I don't remember the specific conditions, but it was basically handling any time the game said, I'm not quite sure where I'm supposed to put you because the camera's in a weird state or something like that. And it always ended up at the Houlihan room, which is not something terribly uncommon. We've talked about a lot of games that have that sort of methodology where they just sort of do something fun to cover up for glitches, like Mickey Mania gave you a level warp anytime the game was about to crash. So
but it just feels like such a like mean-spirited reward for a contest. Like, we are going to name a room after you in Zelda and no one's gonna find it for 20 years. Like that's just crazy. But that can be really useful to get a ton of rupees quickly if you need to go pay Zora 500 rupees to get an item. So that's something you might see a little bit more often in Rando than you've seen before. Also, there's the hovering is just a really powerful tool. Andy obviously famous for his sick hovering skills. There's one room called the Hookshot Cave that has 3 items you cannot get without the hookshot. And then there's also Moldorm 2. So you need the hookshot in Swamp Palace, regardless of what happens. But if Swamp Palace, for some reason, is not required, you don't have to do it because it's a pendant or whatever. You could theoretically go through the whole game without the hookshot if you know how to hover, because Moldorm 2 is the only other time you need it. After you beat Moldorm 2, on the way to Aghanim 2, right at the end of the game, you have to hookshot over that chest, and it's a pretty small gap, so it's probably like one of the easier hovers I would think to learn, maybe, compared to like hovering in the the hookshot room or something. But that could save you a huge amount of time if you need to go find that hookshot just to cross that could take you an extra 5-10 minutes of checks to go ahead and get that, as opposed to being able to cross. If not more, 15-20 minutes. I mean, like, what if the hookshot's on the pedestal and you have to go literally clear 3 dungeons in order to get the hookshot, or you know how to hover? So like,
I know it's like learning how to kill Ganon without the silver arrows. Like, that's just taking a required item off of your list that you need to get every time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that was something that you and Christos had like a friendly agreement about, right? Going into GDQ, if the hookshot was required or wasn't required, you were not allowed to hover Moldorm 2.
Yep.
Because that would have been such a big advantage over Christos. You would have just won that race outright if that situation came up.
It's very rare that situation comes up where A, Swamp Palace is a pendant, B, there's nothing in the back of Swamp Palace, and C, I don't just find the hookshot on my travels.
You don't find it anyways. Yeah, even if those aren't required. I've had one or two situations where it's come up, or I think once, and I was just like, man, I wish I knew how to hover, because now I have to do all this stuff that I just normally wouldn't.
I mean, how many times has that come up in like tournament races where you've been able to have a huge swing because you didn't have to hunt down the hookshot?
Tournament races, I don't think ever.
Okay, so
I have had it come up. I have had it come up a handful of times in like nightly races or weekly races or just random big races on SRL.
I'm sure there's been times where you've gotten a key item in Hookshot Cave, at least for using hover, that somebody else might have had to go hunt down something faster.
Well, so the difference with that is the hovering in Hookshot Cave is more like it's just something that I can do, so I don't have to do a second trip up to Death Mountain.
Sure, absolutely.
So finding an item there isn't necessarily always good, because having Hookshot in Hookshot Cave is a ton faster than having to hover like 3 different gaps.
Sure. But it's nice that you get to knock those checks off. Even if they have nothing, it's an advantage to have over people, to be able to knock those checks off versus, oh, I have to come back here. It's not a short trip going all the way up Death Mountain to get to that cave in order to hookshot across that. Especially if you don't have boots or anything, or you have to mirror over if you don't, because you don't have the hookshot at that point. So, you'd have to. That still saves you time, even if it ends up, hey, there's no items in here, because you want to knock out all of Death Mountain if you can in one shot. Like those are advantages. And so like all these little glitches kind of add up to just the ability to get information, to do checks like more efficiently than other people might be able to, which is really cool. There's also some other additional interesting aspects to doing rando that's different. Dark rooms are a really big part of Randomizer. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So dark room. So in the vanilla game, there's 3 chests with the lamp, and you literally can't miss it, or else the game won't let you progress.
Yeah, you can't push the bookshelf with Zelda, which every NMG runner has accidentally gotten to that point and started pushing the bookshelf, and they're like, "Oh, I forgot to get the lantern."
But the randomizer gives you the light cone in the escape. It used to always give you the lamp in escape, then it got changed to always give you the light cone in the light world, and then it got changed to just the escape as versions got updated. And learning dark rooms essentially just wipes off having lamp as a required item. You always need a fire source, so especially if you already have the fire rod, like you don't need to go look for the lamp to go beat Palace of Darkness or Misery Mire, Turtle Rock. Eastern. So it's like dark rooms are essentially just something that you eventually learn because you have to stay competitive. Like all of these minor glitches that we allow in races or tournaments or whatever are basically just allowing you to do more checks when you shouldn't be able to. Yeah. Like if you have the bow and the hammer, you can go beat Palace of Darkness with or without the lamp if you know how to do that. Yeah. So it gives you more of a push to go do those kind of things.
Yeah, I made a dumb statement earlier, by the way. You still need the bow to finish pod because you have to shoot the statue and you have to kill a bunch of mimics. But you can do most of the items outside. All the items outside of Helmasaur are in the front of that dungeon. So doing something like the bottle glitch, you can get all those checks knocked out. Yeah, dark rooms are really important. I mean, like some of them are much easier than others. Like the Death Mountain and Eastern Palace ones are really easy to learn. Like pod is a much more difficult, section to learn if you know that area of pod. It's a big maze with these Dodongos shooting fireballs at you. So like navigating that maze in the dark is fairly difficult. Something like Aghanim is really, really hard if you, for some reason, decide to do Aghanim dark, but that's pretty uncommon because people want to avoid Aghanim as long as possible.
I did that this tournament, or maybe it was the Key Sandy tournament. I think I did Aghanim's tower with the fire rod and no lamp because that's I knew there was like 3 big keys left that I didn't have already, and I knew one of them was on Lumberjack. So I was like, well,
wow,
there's a 33% chance that that's the one I need. So
literally every room in Aghanim's tower is a dark room if you're not aware of that. So you basically have to do the whole thing blind. So impressive from our boy Andy.
I'm less worried about having to do each individual room in the dark and just more worried about forgetting what order the rooms are in.
Oh yeah, I mean absolutely, for sure. I mean all of that adds up together, but there's so many mazy sections that you take for granted that your vision matters so much for. That pod section, for example, or like one of those first rooms in Aghanim's tower where you have to wind throughout the stuff to get the small key and get out. Like those are very difficult. Definitely something that if you're kind of been doing rando for a while and haven't learned, that's probably something you should do to kind of step up your game and improve that. Also, I think my favorite part of of randomizer for me, as somebody who I feel like I'm decent at Link to the Past. I have an okay NMG time, especially compared to most randomizer, runners, is getting into these Dark World dungeons with, say, 4 or 5 hearts, green mail, and a hammer, but a fighter sword, and having to, kill Mothula with a hammer, or like, just getting into these situations that challenge you much more than you might get challenged in NMG. Doing Turtle Rock with a fighter sword is a lot of fun, stuff like that, and that definitely gives you a huge advantage if you're able to clear those versus saying, no, I need to wait until I get some blue mail or a couple more hearts or a better sword. You only need the Master Sword to beat the game. So if you're able to kill Ganon with the Master Sword, which is a challenge for sure, way harder than with the Tempered Sword, then that gives you a leg up versus people who would have to go hunt down a Tempered Sword in order to help themselves. So any of those kind of challenges, I think, are quite a bit of fun. And obviously, if you're watching someone like Andy, someone like Christos, like, you're probably almost rooting for the seed to go that way because you're. I mean, I would think if I'm racing a random person, like, for me, I'm wanting it to go that way because I feel like I have the execution advantage on them. So whether their gambles pay off or not won't matter as much if I'm able to clear dungeons that they have to go hunting for items for. And so I think that really is one of my favorite parts of the game for sure.
Yeah, at least in early stages of tournaments and stuff, I'm always hoping for like a Master Sword Silverless seed, just because I know that that's going to give me a huge step up over anyone else that I play.
Sure, because just like NMG or anything else, like if they die to Cold Stare because they don't have enough stuff, or they have to, if they're balancing between I might die to Cold Stare or I have to go make an additional 10 checks to try and get something to help me, or go get potions or go get something else, that can add up for sure. So far we mostly talked about standard randomizer, which, as we said, Eastern, you have the lantern just for, or not Eastern, Escape, you have the lantern just for Escape. You always get an attack item with the uncle, but there's a lot of different versions of randomizer, even though that's the most popular for I guess the standard tournaments that have gotten so big. Open is another play type. How does that, like, what are some of the things that you see different for Open?
So open mode starts with escape sequence, like the escape trigger already being done. So it's not raining when you start the game. You can start from either the Sanctuary or Link's house. Escape still has 6 items like it normally does, but the uncle isn't guaranteed to give a weapon. So a lot of the early game is, ammo management, magic management, whether you get like, the Cane of Samaria or the Cane of Burna, or, you need bombs to kill stuff early. All of that stuff can be required.
You also don't get the lantern
advance.
for Escape. So if you want to go get those 6 items, you either need to find the lantern or you need to know how to do those dark rooms as well. Which is, those are some more challenging dark rooms than you'd think. Not in terms of surviving them, but just like finding the chests. Like for me, like there's some chests in some weird locations that it can be really hard to open them.
That thing about the sewer section of Escape is the enemies are all very, very random. The chest is a little difficult to find, depending upon what you have. Like if you don't have like a sword or something that makes it easy for you to tell where you are in the dark, good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not easy for experienced runners to do that, let alone.
So you're not a big fan of the sewers in a randomizer because the enemies are pretty random?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
The enemies, not the items.
No, I got you.
We didn't point this out, but in dark rooms, it's really useful to have a sword, because when you charge your sword, it has a big shiny star thing on the end of it that you're charging up, and so you can move that around and at least have some sort of semblance of an idea of where you are. You try and do a dark room with no sword, which you may have, no sword in an open seed, like, it's not easy. You can't tink your sword against the wall to know that there's a wall there. You can't see exactly where you are. You might have to like throw a boomerang to see where it's coming from, to see where you are. It can be really difficult. What other challenges come from Open? Are there any other things after kind of the initial sequence, or is that really the big difference?
Other than that, the new addition to Standard where the uncle doesn't always give you a sword, that was the biggest thing about Open when Open got made, is that you're not starting with a sword every time. So, most notably, there was a race that I did with Christos, Owen, and a couple others where it was a required swordless kill, blind with the hammer, Helmasaur with the hammer, and Cold Stare with the hammer to get your first sword from whatever Cold Stare gave you. So stuff like that, wasn't a thing you'd even worry about in old standard. But now, you can still get pretty late swords in standard with the randomized weapon.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about that much, but yeah, it is definitely a challenge that would have come from, does come from open, but you didn't used to come from standard, now does, where if you get just 10 bombs in the beginning, you have to be good at using bombs to kill, moving enemies or using the Cane of Samaria. It teaches you to use different weapons that you wouldn't be using too often in NMG. Key Sanity, now we're talking about a whole different level. Key Sanity randomizes all the keys for the different dungeons. So the small and big keys could be, Ice Pal's big key could be in Swamp, etc. I mean, I don't even understand how you keep all track of all that in your brain, but I mean, you want to speak to that for a couple minutes, I guess?
It takes a lot more knowledge of like actual dungeon layouts rather than like in a standard or open seed, that like every dungeon has X number of key items, or like, we call them junk chests because they're non-dungeon related chests. But Key Sanity throws all that out the window. And so you need to know, like, if you have 3 Turtle Rock keys, you can either A, full clear Turtle Rock minus the lava island chest that normally has the big key in it, or you can check that chest, but you can't get to Trinax. So it takes a lot more like knowledge of how to route keys.
And you have to make that decision, right? And the small keys are also in other dungeons, or the small keys stay?
Both.
Wow. So like I could need to get a, I need to make sure I get a certain number of small keys for that dungeon before I go into it at all, probably.
Right.
Stuff like that.
Like a big one is like Swamp Palace. There's only one small key chest, and it's always in the first chest in the dungeon. So so you need that small key to gain access to the entire rest of the dungeon. And because that's not guaranteed to be in that one chest, you need to, like, you're pretty much, if I don't find the Swamp small key, I'm not going into Swamp.
But once you get it, if you have the items you need, you can full clear it. So like, but whereas other dungeons may have 3, 4, Pod has a whole ton of keys in it. So Pod's
6.
probably really confusing to try and route and make sure you keep your mind up to date on what you have, what you need. Whew.
Does it happen very often that you sort of hold out on going into a dungeon because you don't feel like you have enough keys for it, and it turns out that the key is in the dungeon itself that you were holding out for?
Key Sanity is interesting because it's relatively linear. Like, seeds generally like breadcrumb you in the right direction. Like in a normal seed, if you get like Titan's Mitts and the Flute and the Moon Pearl, a medallion and something else, like the game's like, hey, go to Meyer, you idiot. But in Key Sanity, like there's a lot more breadcrumbs where you can be like, oh, the game's giving me like 3 early pod keys, I should probably go in pod. So it's a lot more linear than people think, just because there's so many more required items to beat the game.
And are the Ganon's Tower items all in Ganon's Tower, or can you also get Ganon's Tower items outside of that?
Nope, those are also outside. Ganon's Tower small keys, Ganon's Tower big key, which they can very well be in Ganon's Tower. But if you don't have it and it's not, then you're...
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's
so
fun.
I will never probably try that. I mean, I guess I can't say that. I probably will, but I don't know how you don't just like your brain doesn't start hemorrhaging as you try and process all of that information.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
It's just more knowledge to have. Like, you just need to know like how many keys are in some dungeons. You need to know what doors to open, what not to open.
Yeah, it's so easy to forget those things though, because you're it's not the fact that you know it or don't know it. It's like knowing it in the moments when you need to know it to make decisions. Because it's really easy if you ask me now, like, oh, how many keys are in this dungeon? I can think of it, but like, I will certainly end up in a situation where I have forgotten that when I need to know it. So then there's also Entrance Randomizer, which I've never played. Do you want to talk to that?
So there's a lot of different variations of Entrance Randomizer. There's like different levels of shuffling, I suppose. There's like simple shuffle, which like keeps all the dungeons in like normal dungeon locations. It just might be a different dungeon. And that's also like partially limited because every dungeon has a different number of like actual entrances. So like Eastern only has 1 entrance and exit, so it can be shuffled with any other dungeon that has 1 entrance and exit. But Desert has like 4. So like Desert and Turtle Rock can only be shuffled in between each other. So there's there's simple shuffle. There's like full shuffle, which also randomizes, like cave entrances and house entrances with other stuff. Then there's like cross world, which shuffles like single in and out entrances, multi in and out entrances, and like light world and dark world. And like just the more stuff you add, the more of a cluster it becomes.
And then you can also do what you've coined as a hell randomizer, which is an enemy and entrance randomizer. So what enemies get randomized? All of them, even bosses, or
so I coined that as hell randomizer because it was at the time the max entrance randomizer setting, which was insanity, which guaranteed Moon Pearl and Mirror in Sanctuary and Link's house, and then just literally threw everything in a pile, and it's all just mixed up. So like everything would always be the same. So like if you went up through cave A entrance, you would always get put to the same spot, but going back down through that exit would not take you to the entrance you just went through.
Oh my gosh.
So it'd be a lot of like, going up and down in the same like transition to see like where it looped and where it took you, because you need that to like, maybe get access to Dark World Death Mountain or get access to like Village of Outcasts and the Dark World, stuff like that.
Wow.
And then we also threw on a full enemy randomizer, which randomizes all. It's a sprite randomizer essentially that randomizes all enemies. It randomizes bosses and dungeons. It randomizes the amount of health the enemies have. It randomizes the amount of damage they do to you.
Goodness.
I understand where it gets its name from.
I'm gonna do one of those as a sub incentive, I think, because like that's a great, like, that's really the only thing I can see that being useful for is like, if I reach X amount of subs, you can watch me suffer for this amount of time. Like that's the only amount of use that I feel like that kind of category has.
I think my favorite part about the max enemy randomizer is that it also randomizes what the males do. So like there's green male, which is like standard. Blue male halves your damage, red male halves your damage again. But in the enemy randomizer, what they do is they just shuffle the damage table again. So enemies can do anywhere from 0 damage to 8 hearts of damage in total, because that's the max damage that any enemy in Link to the Past can do. So like an Octorok could do half a heart with green male, but you get blue male and then it does 7 hearts instead.
Oh god.
So it's not necessarily. So males are something like you don't want to find, because you get used to like what enemies do what damage, and then you find
so it changes
a male
based
upgrade.
on the enemy too.
Yes, and so you'd find a male upgrade, and you just don't know anymore. Like everything that you had learned about damage and enemies up to that point was just out the window, and it's
that's not good. That's not a good thing.
That's crazy, and it's not like you can switch male. Like it'd be nice if it was a switchable item or something, and you could get a semblance of a pattern. Wow. Well, if you haven't noted from this discussion, there's all kinds of randomizer you can do with Link to the Past. You can also do settings for like easy, normal, hard, which I'm not exactly sure what those do. You can set for Uncle Guaranteed Sword or not. You can set these entrance randomizers. You can set a glitched or glitchless, so like the logic can actually expect you to know glitches or not. You can do just all sorts of stuff with this, different end goals, so not just kill Ganon. There's like shorter ones where there's little pieces of Triforce you have to find, and there's 30 of them and you only have to find 20. I mean, you can, any experience you want to have with this game, you can have. My question for you, Andy, my last question, have you guys ever, like you in the community, have you all ever just considered buying a different video game? Like it feels like you squeezed enough juice from the orange to this point that you could maybe move on and just like buy a different game.
You don't need to anymore. Everything you could ever want is in Link to the Past now.
Okay. Awesome. Any last thoughts, I guess, about strategies of the rando or anything else from either of you?
Learning is a lot more important than execution to start.
Yeah, I guess that's how I wanted to end too. Is just like what would you recommend? I would say the majority of people are probably around where I'm at. Maybe not quite just because of the NMG experience. But like, what would you recommend for people to get better at rando? If they're saying, "Man, I keep getting knocked out in these tournaments," or "I want to be better in my races," what would you recommend them do?
Big thing I recommend:
train me on an island or like in like a planet like Yoda trained Luke Skywalker and you. So. I need you to tell me the answer.
The biggest thing to learn, besides just like general like routing strategies, is like when you're playing through Randomizer, if it ends up giving you like a hard situation, like, you know, Mothula with Fighter Sword or something. Like, if you're finding yourself in a situation and dying profusely, just practice that situation.
Yeah.
And
Totally
then
makes sense.
and
Yeah,
then
the
that's
practice
it. Like, you know,
ROM, the actual standard A Link to the Past practice ROM will let you try any of those scenarios with any situation you want. You can pick your equipment.
mhm.
It's definitely helpful if you use that ROM. I mean, you can learn the dark rooms a lot easier. You don't have to learn them in an actual,
Yep.
you know, randomizer seat. I went ahead and booted up the practice ROM and just started learning them without the pressure of, you know, my clock running or anything.
Mhm.
Pulled up a map and just kind of memorized what path worked best for me. So you can definitely go through, learn those dark rooms. If you don't know the SD SNES has a practice ROM, I think you can probably also use it on emulator, I would assume.
You can use it on
And
emulator. You can use it on SNES Classic. You can use it on EverDrive. You can use
oh, it
pretty
works on
much anything.
EverDrive now too.
I don't think you can
I
do
don't
room save
the
states.
built-in save states, like the save state function doesn't work
Okay.
But the
on
presets
anything
do.
but SD SNES.
Okay.
But there's built-in save states in the ROM.
And there's a
that
lot
has,
of
like,
them. I mean,
yeah,
there's
so
like
I think
one
there's
for
like
every couple
160
rooms.
save states built into this ROM.
So I wasted about $140 on my SD SNES. Thanks,
Mhm.
that's great. Yeah, so just definitely practice through those things. Do that. I think there's also a huge lack of NMG execution. That, like, I think a lot of randomizer runners, if they learned NMG and just got like a sub 140, would be way better at rando because they just haven't learned enough of the execution. I guess the movement execution.
Yeah, the ones that care have actually taken their
Moved
energy
over.
times
Yeah.
down relatively well. Like Gyardo and Zero Rush, both of them started with Link to the Past from Randomizer. Gyardo actually has a better NMG PB than I do now,
Wow.
and Zero Rush is like 20 seconds behind me or something like that. So there's a handful of people that have been like, okay, I want to like take my game to the next level,
Yeah.
and actually gotten good.
Are you worried that those people will now get signed by Allegiance and you'll be booted?
I'm pretty confident that Allegiance will hang on to me.
Nice. I like to hear that. So we'll go ahead and just wrap things up. I'll take a quick break, listen to some music, and then we're going to do some of your live Q&A.
All right, so to start off with your live Q&A, those of you who are familiar with our podcast, we definitely have some rooms on our Discord where you can ask questions ahead of time, and we have some of those questions ready for today. And for those of you who are watching us live, hello, live audience, we also collect your questions that you ask in the chat and save them for the end of the episode, so we've got a few of those as well. So I'm going to start
If
off
you don't
with...
watch live, you can't see me do this. Yeah, see the podcast, people don't know what I just did.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
You'll have to go
See?
check it out on YouTube. Just remember the
You're gonna have
timestamp.
that's gonna get us so many plays. All the podcast listeners are gonna be like, well, I got to find out what he did now.
That was the trick. All he had to do was do that. So the Lost Carol on Twitch asks, "Why the pug?" For Andy.
So we're gonna take a time machine and go back to 2002.
A hot tub time machine.
One could only dream that
Okay.
it's a hot tub time machine. But so my dad picked me up from school one day, and might have been 2001. Anyways, so like growing up, I had a German Shepherd. German Shepherd passed away. We got a Yorkie, and you see Yorkies everywhere. But so one day, my dad picked me up from school and said, "Hey, we're going somewhere different today. It might be a little while." And I was like, "Okay." So I'm in the car doing some homework, whatever. I end up falling asleep, and I end up getting woken up by a pug puppy whimpering and licking my face that we had just bought.
Aww.
And from then on, I have just been in love with the pug.
What was his name? Her name? His name?
His name was Champ,
Nice.
but you couldn't legally name a dog Champ, so his name was Campeón, which is just Spanish for champion.
I'm
Nice.
sorry. Can you walk this back a second?
Yeah.
You're not allowed to legally name a dog Champ?
Yes.
Could you maybe break that one down for me a little bit? Because I'm very...
I don't know the specifics because I was 11.
Where was this again?
It was in Virginia.
I think your dad just didn't
That's
want you
where
to
I
have a dog named Champ.
I'm
So
glad
I
our
think it
tax
was.
money
I think.
here in
I think it
Virginia
was
going to
because
quality
it was
lawmakers.
because if you if you entered your dog in a dog contest, his name could not be Champ or Champion because
it insinuates that he should win. It like gives him an edge.
I
Okay.
guess
I'm going to vote for Champ because the name's Champ. They must be the best.
Okay. That's a lot.
Wow.
That's a lot.
I'm
That's-
glad to know my
that's all I
taxpayer
got.
money in Virginia is going towards some very important things being managed by our government. That is very good to know.
So on Discord, Space Cow asked the question, 3 months ago, could you have ever imagined that you would be doing this episode?
I mean, I guess I can kick that out. I think we've thought about doing this episode for 2 years, so I
Yeah.
would say yes. In that instance, would I have expected the episode to involve me being excited to talk about randomizer strategy? No, I would not have expected that.
Yeah, I put
4 months ago.
so you guys don't know this, but we have a list of just a giant spreadsheet of ideas we've had at times. John tells me to make the list shorter, and every time he does, I just make it twice as long. But we've had
And then he says he has no ideas. What do I do my pocket on? He has
Yeah, I have
45
no clue.
ideas. Like-
And then we've had randomizer on the list for the longest time, and every
been a
time we
long
talked
time.
about it, it was like, well, I don't know how we'd make an episode out of that. Like, what do you talk about for randomizers? All it took was John playing A Link to the Past randomizer, and now it's like, let's do it. So
Yep. I've been infected for sure, but yeah, I think we've expected it for a long time, but I think we really didn't want it to be just us memeing on it because I think it is really awesome, and we've always, in all joking aside, had a lot of respect for randomizer and the randomizer community. It's just never been something Chad or I really, engaged with that much or was really excited about. And now that I've gotten a little bit of the bug, I think it's just kind of made sense. Proximity Sound asks, should every game get a randomizer? That's kind of like a follow-up on the... That's kind of a follow-up on, should every game have a speedrun? I think every game deserves a speedrun. I don't know if every game deserves a randomizer.
I think that we're already pushing the limits on what games deserve a randomizer. As someone who has made a randomizer for a game that doesn't probably deserve one, but I think that there's a lot of games out there with some really interesting ideas, and I've been very surprised to say. I feel like my answer to this has probably also changed over the past 3 months, because 3 months ago I would have said, no, half the randomizers that exist do not belong. But there have been a lot of really creative ideas. Like there's the Final Fantasy IV free enterprise randomizer that exists right now.
That's really
an
cool.
open world RPG randomizer is kind of a crazy idea. And I think that it probably took a lot of technical know-how to really suss that one out. So making that is really creative. I mean, there's a lot of different randomizers out there that have just done really cool things. Some of them fell on their face, I think. I think Ocarina of Time Beta Quest was a neat idea, a pure entrance randomizer for Ocarina of Time. I don't think it ended up being a great idea, but it was innovative at the time. It was a neat idea that people weren't doing, and so...
Yeah, free enterprise, if you're not aware, you can access, I think, anywhere on the map. You get the airship right in the beginning of Final Fantasy IV.
Yeah.
There's no random encounters, so you're really kind of doing the randomizer thing of getting the stuff you need to beat bosses that you have. and you only get your experience from bosses. Pretty cool. I know our friend Matchbox Matt has gotten addicted to it. A couple of other friends. So I've been racking my brain forever to think of a good Game Boy randomizer that doesn't exist that I'd want to push to get made, and I have a life goal of figuring one out, but I'm just not there.
Well, we
yet,
already have
so.
a Game Boy randomizer that's perfect, which is the Final Fantasy Legend 2, where every time you eat meat, you randomly change your party. So.
Oh yeah, but that's actually just the way the game was made, so that's a little different.
Man.
All right, so Dr. No asks, do you think A Link to the Past will ever get the same hacking community support and acceptance as Super Mario World? So I think A Link to the Past... Yeah, you jump in here.
I'm going to say no. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Similar to Nintendo making Super Mario Maker, I don't think they'll ever be making a Super Zelda Maker. Because Mario, you can just like throw crap on a screen and make a level. Like it's not going to be good, but you can throw crap on a screen and it's going to be a level that somebody could play and finish. And it takes a lot less like level design. Like obviously good, SMW hacks take a lot of level design knowledge and stuff like that. But like at a base level, like Zelda games in general need level design to even be something that's playable.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a reason why.
Investment.
First, I'll say there's a reason why people get paid a lot of money to design Zelda games and make these puzzles that people are interested. I mean, that's what makes Zelda interesting, right? The combat and then the puzzles in the dungeons. And so, like, to trust people to make interesting puzzles would be kind of tough. I wouldn't say never. Like, the question, do you think ever? But, like, I think if it were going to happen anytime soon, it would have happened by now in some at least embryonic form. Like there's outside of there's been like one or two Zelda Link to the Past like ROM hacks, but for the most part it's just not really.
There's a number of really good Link to the Past.
There's a number of good hacks, but
there's a ton of really good ones, but it'll never my answer's no for the opposite reason though, is because you made the mistake of comparing it to SMW. SMW has a absolutely fanatic hacking scene. And I don't think any game will ever reach that level. No matter how much they grow, Super Mario World will grow just as fast, and they've already got a head start on you. So
it's also hard because like people who love Link to the Past so much, the randomizer has been their outlet. Whereas SMW, the person who made their randomizer did a terrible job, so it's like they don't have that outlet. Just kidding. I love you. I
guess it'd be more comparable to something like Super Metroid, where Super Metroid still has a ton of hacks, and it's a ton of really good hacks, also some really bad hacks. But I just like it. Link to the Past just is not programmed as well to like have like an editing tool like Super Metroid and SMW have.
Sure.
Yeah.
So on Twitch, Cassidy Moen asks, in open mode and in the Super Metroid A Link to the Past combo randomizer, I noticed that Andy checks the Uncle and Dam without combining them with Escape and Mini Moldorm Cave. Why do you favor these first rather than going to Kakariko, for example?
So in open mode, I don't go to the Dam first generally. I'll go to the Uncle because there's 2 checks and you get a tree pull, which in the vanilla game gives you rupees on 3 different tiers. But in the randomizer, they randomize what actually comes out of the tree into any consumable drop. So I'll do that to either get money early or get bombs early or something like that to kind of speed up having to either buy bombs or like make Kakariko a little faster with bombs.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that, but that is also a small strategy, like pulling trees, crab bushes, and also stun packs where you use a boomerang or a hook shot to stun an enemy and kill them. Those drops are all randomized, so that can be a strategy, figuring those out early, because you may pull the tree and get bombs. That's really valuable early because you need a lot of bombs to do a lot of these different checks, or you might get a lot of rupees, which is useful for paying Sora, doing other things. So those are useful checks as well. Plasmodium Vivax asks, is there any chance that Nintendo releases an official Link to the Past rando by hiring people already invested in it, the same way Sega did with Sonic ROM hackers, helping them produce Sonic Mania? What do you all think?
So the question asked about A Link to the Past randomizer and compared it to Sonic ROM hackers and Sega Mania, but I think Randomizer, no. I don't think Nintendo will ever produce a Zelda randomizer, even for non-A Link to the Past, even for like future Zelda titles. I don't think that they'll ever produce any sort of randomizer. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Nintendo take a Zelda game and basically do exactly what they did with Master Quest, which is make a ROM hack of the game and release it officially later. I totally see Zelda games sort of add that in after the fact. So
Yeah, I mean, I think if they were to at all follow that model of Sonic Mania, and I've heard people bring this up before, they would make an SMW hack, right? I mean, like, I don't think they would make a randomizer. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And who would be asking for the randomizer? Like, the people who already want the randomizer have it. So like, what are we going to buy it on our Switch? I mean, I just don't
it's an
see what the
interesting
benefit
idea.
would be. And if I grew up with Link to the Past and Nintendo said we're releasing a randomizer, I'd be like, I don't even understand what that is. Like, the casual gamer would not have any interest in a randomizer that I'm aware of. Like,
I think it's tough because I think that there's like a lot of good ideas there, but exactly like you're saying, anyone who knows what that is and knows that they want it are already savvy enough to do it already. So
like, I have plenty of friends who are huge Zelda fans that aren't, gamers typically. Like, they're not playing games all the time or whatever, but like, I have a friend who's been going through all of the Zelda games and wants to have beaten them all. Like, so he's probably beaten Link to the Past a few times. I don't think he would have any interest in a randomizer. To him, he wouldn't be able to compute what that even meant to him. He's not involved in the Twitch community. He doesn't see these races and stuff. Like, it's really, I mean, as much as we like to say that we're growing, and we are growing, speedrunners are getting picked up on esports teams and such, like, it's still a niche, and like, that niche isn't something I feel like Nintendo's going to like. I mean, Nintendo's a very conservative company too. Like, outside of like someone like Sega, Sony, like they haven't even figured out how to use the internet with their video games yet, and it's 2018. So I don't really see them implementing randomizer with their games.
So to finish up our Discord questions, Andy J. Retro asks, besides A Link to the Past, what other randomizers excite you? So me and John have talked about a few. Do you have any other specific ones, Andy? You can't say Super Metroid plus A Link to the Past rando either.
OT Rando Zooter.
Oh, okay, Zooter.
I should say.
Thanks.
It's a lot of fun. It's really similar to like the way the A Link to the Past randomizer is done, and we're like, OT has a bunch of hard locks in terms of items that, like, hey, you need this to go check certain stuff. So it's relatively similar, but it's also like Ocarina of Time, and I love that game.
Sure. Yeah, me and Christos talked a lot about that, about what makes A Link to the Past take off in a way that Ocarina of Time randomizer may not ever. And
it's
primarily,
too long, man.
I mean, you sometimes go minutes without being able to open a chest, whereas A Link to the Past, you're just flying through chests. So
it's
it makes
too long too.
Yeah,
I mean, imagine a
race.
race.
Just long.
Imagine a Zooter race where like one person finishes in 5 hours and the other finishes in 6.5. What do you show the last hour and a half of the person racing? Like, I'm guessing you would have to just set a forfeit at that point, right? I mean, like,
I don't know.
It's not who's going to sit for 7 hours and watch that race all the time. Like, it's just never going to build the same amount of excitement
unless they figure out a good way to like speed it up.
Quick travel or some sort of like shorter goal than just killing Ganon.
That's kind of the approach that the new Wind Waker randomizer. I'm kind of excited to try that one out because they've implemented a lot of the quality of life stuff that came from Wind Waker HD, like the quick sail, and while you're sailing, the wind changes direction to follow you automatically without you pulling out the Wind Waker. And then the game automatically starts you off with like a sword and the boat right out the gate, so you can just get going with the game. All of the dungeons are already unlocked, and it removes the Triforce hunt at the end of the game, so it makes it like a nice compact experience. So
yeah, I mean, that we spoke to that earlier, and we had seen kind of a follow-up question or a previous question, what makes Link to the Past so popular? I think really that 1.5 to 2 hour length time is a huge part of what makes it popular as a race. As
60 to 90 minutes is like that sweet spot. It's long enough that you can see like lead changes and you can see like the development of a narrative over the course of the whole race, but it's short enough that you can consume it in one sitting.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And there's generally, like you said, constant action. Like chests are always being opened. You're always like, what's going to be in that chest? It's kind of like why people buy lottery tickets. You scratch it off and you're like, what's going to be under here? And then you're like, oh, that's all that was there. And then you get another one. You're like, what's under here? So it's just, that constant, gamble for something could possibly be there. But I would say for me, I like Zelda 1 and I like OOT, or Zooter, sorry. Zooter for me, I've never beaten Ocarina of Time. I don't know what's going on in Zooter. I've watched a lot of Zooter. I still don't know what's going on at all. But for some reason, it's a really comfy stream for me. Shout outs to Skybills. Skybills is my favorite Zooter random Zooter runner. Wow, that's hard to say. Zooter runner.
You've been undone by your own need to say
yeah.
Zooter.
She's my favorite Zooter runner. I don't know what's happening in the game. I don't know. It takes like 6 hours. I don't know anything. I don't know what any of the dungeons are. I don't get it at all. But for some reason, it's real comfy for me. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Any other randomizers that we haven't mentioned? I really like the Super Mario Land 2 randomizer.
I enjoy Pokemon randomizers. They're a bunch of fun to do.
Okay.
I couldn't do them on a regular basis, but I enjoy doing them like once or twice a year.
Okay.
Zooter Rooter. Yes.
No.
Someone who routes a Zooter is a Zooter Rooter.
No. Please
Okay.
never. So Meekin's box asks, do you you've covered it up, John, by placing your cursor there. Do you know if any of the future tourneys will have a skill gate for entry? 512 was a lot of people. That's a great point. Link to the Past randomizer has moved past critical mass, and it's becoming a comedy. It's becoming a comedy of errors. I
will say
that's
that
for Andy.
Completely open entry will not be happening again.
Okay.
It was. It's silly to say, but we weren't expecting this many people to join. Like, we knew the community was very large, and it's like larger than anything that like the speedrunning community or like the people that are involved with the speedrunning community have ever seen. And for the last tournament, we did a qualifier setting and only had 100 people. But we weren't expecting to get 512 people to sign up for this tournament in the matter of days.
Yeah.
And then also having another 50 or so on the wait list.
So how do you evaluate? So let's say we do put up a skill gate. Let's say that 512 has to get cut down. How do you evaluate them?
Using the poker analogy, like I feel like you could see like satellite tournaments and stuff feeding into this tournament, right? Like, hey, here's an open tournament for anybody, but top 4 from this tournament go into the real tournament. In
an ideal world, you have qualification tournaments that lead to like leagues or whatever. Like, I think that would be the best way to do it overall. Is like have leagues where you have auto relegation and auto promotion, and then like below a certain league, everyone just gets thrown into like an open qualifier pool, and like the good people are always going to be in the top league or two.
I'm real proud of you, Andy. I was expecting you to say SRL points, so I'm real proud of you.
The realisticness of that ever becoming like a fluid function, I don't think will happen. At least not.
You're going to say SRL points now, aren't you?
No. So what happened last tournament was there were four qualifier races. You were required to join at least one of them, obviously, if you wanted to qualify, and then it used like a Z-score, like who was in the race compared to what your time was compared to the average time minus the first and last outliers or whatever, and giving you a score based on that, and the top X number of scores made it. That formula wasn't perfect, and I think something like that can be worked on, but that will be for the future.
That's really interesting.
To throw out some of my ideas real quick, just in comparison to like standard sporting events and stuff like that. Like I said, with poker, like they have qualifying tournaments to enter in, the winner of this gets a free entry or top whatever. With golf, for golf tournaments, for example, like if you're in a certain ranking or if you've won a previous tournament, like if you won any, like you won in like that specific tournament last year, you automatically get entrance into it. Doesn't matter if you're literally ranked the worst golfer in the world. You won it last year, you get to come back. So like there's all these different qualifications for things that don't have these objective ratings that you could necessarily say, well, he's better than this person or whatever. Like with a standard speedrun tournament, like you could just go off PB, but that's obviously not something you can go off in this situation. So
Right.
I feel like there's a lot of room for creativity. I really like your league's idea too. Like look at it like soccer, where you get relegated or promoted based on like, here's how you've done the last 20 races in this league, so you can be in this tournament or not. Or I don't know. There's a lot of really cool stuff that could take effect.
It would be the most fun with the league method, like, you know, having like X number of people in a league. Because like, you know, if you threw like, you know, like everyone that was in like the top 16 of this current tournament in a league, and they like all played each other and like did whatever, like all those matches would be nuts.
Absolutely.
But it would take like a very large like timetable of like how things have to go to develop this and to keep it like running properly.
Yeah, these kind of things are hard to organize, especially when you're not dealing with organizations. Everybody's volunteering, right? I mean, you're not organizing like a Dota tournament with these esports organizations.
People aren't getting paid to do the things that they're doing for the tournament. We all do it.
So it's kind of hard. The last question, I really want to ask this because this is my big question with Link to the Past Rando, and I've been heaping praise on it, but this is kind of one of my bigger issues with it. But Emo Saru, who you may know, shout outs to her because she designed one of the most popular trackers. So if you're looking to get into Rando, you can download her tracker, and that has a map that shows you where all the locations are. It changes colors based on whether or not those sections are available to you based on the items you have or not. It's really useful tool, and it's really awesome. She edited it for color blindness in one day for me because I couldn't tell the difference between certain locations and stuff. You can edit it with JSON, so you can make it look certain ways. It's really cool. She asks, how does Andy feel about the current state of the balance between execution and gambling/skips in the competitive Zelda 3 randomizer scene?
So the lack of an execution barrier is both good and bad. It allows, like, the big flaw I feel and have felt for a long time with speedrun tournaments is that you know the outcome of at least most of the matches before you even see them happen. And that's really boring. Like esports has that like in a part, but like, you know, in speedrunning, you know, if it's like me racing Zelda, like the likelihood of me like pulling that upset is incredibly low.
Yeah.
Like he could be on an off day, I could be on my best day, and that still might not be enough. Or like in Randomizer, there's like a chance of an underdog upsetting a powerhouse, like same as in esports. But the downside to it is that like at a high level, like top 32, top 64, whatever, top 128, anybody could win any best 2 out of 3 against anybody else. Like, you know, one decision can make somebody win or lose a randomizer, and that like it's not a great situation, but I don't think it tarnishes the competitiveness of randomizer at all.
No,
like
it's
Ben AJ Neb won the first 2 randomizer tournaments. Like, you know, it's not entirely, you know, luck at a high level. Although luck plays more of a part as the execution gets closer.
Absolutely.
But I don't think it's a fault.
Yeah, it's a tough question because ultimately you kind of start getting that same issue of like, well, the best executors are the ones finishing in the top 8, 16, right? I mean, like you're in the top 16 per usual. Ben's there, Christos is there. Like the people you would expect to be there are still there, even based on the luck. But like when these races happen, you know, the routing is not as dynamic as it could be like in another type of sport or something. Like ultimately you're gonna go about the same path, and so like in order to try and make up any of that execution time, you really just have to make blind gambles, and like that's kind of, you know, that's tough to like have games decided by that, right? I mean, it sucks
to happen, but you know, you kind of accept it. Like it's definitely not the best thing to happen. Like you feel like the person who plays better should win.
Sure. But that's like what makes it interesting too. So
that's also makes it like I guess I can put a sport example there. Like the NBA sucks because Golden State is winning all the time.
You already know they're going to win next year. They got DeMarcus Cousins for $5 million, and like they're going to win next year. There's literally
the NBA
no
has
reason
a
to
whole
play
ton of
next
other
season.
issues that are like completely non-related.
Yeah.
But so it's definitely an issue, but it's not a huge fault.
It's part of the meta, really, and like ultimately, like some of the meta could be to like not do that, right? Like you're in a top match against somebody, and you're like, I'm gonna actually play it safe. I'm gonna make sure I don't make one of those gambles that screws me. And like if he makes one gamble, or he or she makes one gamble that ends up losing them the match, then like I'm good to go. So like it is really an interesting way to like the strategy of it going in is definitely fairly dynamic, and you can see it evolve over time.
I would rather play someone that's closer to my skill level than someone that is like significantly below my skill level, because I know that like I can kind of gauge how my opponent is going to play. Where like if I'm playing someone who's like a severe underdog in execution, is going to just like be playing like ridiculous. Like in a best of 3, they're going to try to win one.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what they're going to do. I have no idea what decisions they're going to make.
So you heard it here first. Andy refuses to race me. He is not interested in the matchup. I understand. But yeah, I think for the most part, that's good 2 hours on Rando. Better than we used to think. What are we going to do? How are we going to do a whole episode on Rando? Here we are. We're still talking. 2 hours, 15 minutes in. I think that's a pretty good wrap here. Andy, where can people find you if they want to follow you? Where can they buy your jersey? Where can they get your autograph? Give us the deets.
So follow me on Twitter at Andy Lasso. I have a YouTube with the same channel name. You can buy Allegiance merch. I'm sure if you Google Allegiance store, a nice link will pop up there. Can use the code Andy to get 5% off of all your purchases.
Wow. Big day. Looking at my Andy and my Grand Pooh Bear and my Patty jerseys.
Orange, white, and black are such good colors.
They are really good colors.
They're really such good colors. And then twitch.tv/Andy.
Yeah, definitely.
Unfortunately, I will never get Twitter at Andy because the person who has that is Andy Cohen, and he's kind of famous.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough battle for you.
All you have to do is get more famous than him, and they'll give it to you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would love for you to get more famous than Andy Cohen through Zelda Randomizer. I want to live in the world where somehow that happens.
If that ever happens.
I want to tell that Cinderella story.
Yeah. So definitely go give Andy a follow. Great streamer. Obviously been around the community a long time, and thanks again to him for coming on again and spending his time, not just this episode, but the Pocket episode. Shout outs to Allegiance for helping us with that episode as well. They definitely gave us information and stuff that helped. Shout outs to Christos for giving us a bunch of information on the puzzle races and stuff like that. He's one of my favorite people I got to become friends with at GDQ and hang out with. So definitely give him a follow as well. He has a lot of impact on this community and is a big part of the information we were able to provide you today. If you're looking for stuff for us, you can find us at theframesavers.com. It has links to all of our different things. You can check out if you want to support us. You can either sub to our Twitch channel for $4.99, get some emotes at $4.99 or $9.99, or you can go to patreon.com/theframesavers. That money helps us pay for a lot of things, pays for our editing, pays for our hosting, a whole number of things, some other projects that we have in the works. So we really appreciate your support there. It helps us a lot. Our $25 a month patrons, we want to give a shout out to Tina Hacks, Mr. Pizak, Kip with 2 P's, and Drex, DDRREEXX. Go give them follows on Twitch. They're all great streamers. They provide a lot of awesome content.
I wanted to plug Drex has a 24-hour St. Jude stream coming up this Friday.
Oh, cool.
So,
yeah, definitely go check that out. Drex, he's
nice
gifted
big
many
charity
stuff
stream.
here.
He's a big supporter of both me and John and the Frame Savers, all separate. Good guy, and he's doing a 24-hour charity stream for St. Jude. So That's this
So
Friday.
outside of his clearly poor judgment in being big supporters of us, he is a really good streamer and cool guy. So definitely go support him, support St. Jude. That's an awesome charity for sure. Also, you can just find us typical places: Twitter, Discord, where you can ask Q&A. All those links are on our website, so check that out. We also want to give shout outs to Warp World Podcast. They're a buddy podcast of ours, I guess. We're like buddy cops in this world, and you can find them at podcast.warp.world. They do a lot of Twitch news. They also have game Warp World Historians just came out, which is kind of similar to some of the content we do in the beginning of these episodes, where they kind of go through the history of games and stuff like that. It's really interesting. Definitely worth a listen with Xwater and Duran Keys. So check that out. Also, you can follow me at not Author Blues. Don't follow me at Author Blues.
Yeah, follow me
at
there.
John Carls. Follow me at John Carls on Twitter and Twitch. John Carls 1 at YouTube. What about you, Chadwick?
Author Blues at Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube.
Huge shout out to Brian Morgenthaler for producing this podcast. He does stream sometimes at BMorgs TV. He also has a Twitter. Go follow him. Huge shout outs to Space Cow for helping organize the live Q&A. He's been doing that a lot for us. So go give him a hug or a follow on Twitch or something. And that's about it. I think that wraps it up. This was a very random episode. Yeah,
Okay.
see what I did there?
I gotcha.
But I think we talked about a lot of good things. So any last thoughts?
We talked about things. Now all you have to do is take all the pieces of this episode and put them on your iPod and turn it on shuffle, and you can randomize the episode.
Ooh.
Podcast TFS randomizer coming soon. Look for it. That's it for us. Thank you so much. Please feel free to follow if you're new to the Twitch stream. We're really excited to have a bunch of extra viewers than normal, and we will see you next week. Actually, next Sunday, I believe, with another episode on The Hobbit for GameCube. So definitely look for that. We'll see you later.